For the last few months, I've been religiously playing Incision, one of my favorite throwback shooters to date. While the action, combat and level design are stellar and keep me coming back, it is the vibes, atmosphere and story that are even more unique. From the very start, we're already dealing with eldritch, godlike beings, cataclysms of meat filth, an inhuman protagonist, and hordes of grotesquely twisted monsters. Just in episode 1, we are trapped in a cocoon of flesh, traverse a decrepit factory and corrupted cityscape, along with descending into the maddening vestiges of a death cult, and fight their object of worship. If you're at all interested in the writings of Lovecraft, you owe it to yourself to check out this game. The actual events depicted in cutscenes and gameplay can be cryptic, but there's scraps of context scattered throughout, level transition screens, so-called lore bits, affixed to points in space of high importance, and bestiary descriptions. Especially later on in the game, there's a lot of strange events that didn't make sense upon a first playthrough, and have been stewing inside my head this entire time, trying to make sense of them. This is why I'm making this video, to go over every bit of story the game has to offer, and try to piece everything into a cohesive whole. I was originally going to be making this as one video, but the script has grown into a huge monster, so I think I will tackle just episode 1 for now. Let's now get to an obnoxiously thorough analysis that I probably spent way more thought into than the creator themselves. Episode 1 starts with a cutscene in which two humans in hazmat suits are running away from this grotesque and evil-looking entity. We will quickly find out that one of them is the player character, and the big alien-looking creature is called the Grafting Throne. A sea of blood starts to rise, and a hand emerges to grab and pull the other human in. Soon, the throne takes hold of the protagonist and stabs his face with a tentacle. It's important to note they aren't killed, but start a transformation. This metallic-looking mesh appears in the hole before slowly forming into the metal mask and glowing eyes that we will get quite familiar with. For a second, the screen flashes black and the words "kill me" can be seen. At first viewing, it sounds like this is the protagonist wanting to die because they are in agony, but I will later explain what this really represents. On top of that, a bone-like blade grows out of their forearm and falls off. We cut forward in time and see the player character cutting open and studying some living organism before being interrupted by a commotion upstairs. Soldiers have come to kill or eliminate the protagonist, and they look hesitantly out the window before getting ready for combat. So, what exactly is going on here? The Grafting Throne will be the primary antagonist of the game, and it's capable of manipulating and controlling the sea of flesh that rose up in response to the presence of the two humans. This growth consumes, adapts, and builds organic constructs, like some Lovecraftian god. Let's read part of the bestiary description for the protagonist, who is called Healer in this menu. Only part, as I'd like to cover this story in vaguely chronological order, so we'll come back to it later. Military scientist, former archaeologist, and war veteran, loner, enjoyer of guns, and a man of bad temper, he was called to examine the newly found ruins of the old cult underneath her home city, with a small team of various famous experts on the matter. For reasons unknown to all, the Grafting Throne, and who resided within it, used his body in the process of rebranding to create a superhuman killing machine. A blade grew out from the bone of his forearm, an object of mystery and obsession. This paragraph explains what the characters were doing in the first cutscene. Note that the text says, "the Grafting Throne" and "who resided within it." We'll come back to that later. In the cutscene, we also see that Healer attached the bone blade to the spear saw weapon, which shows that he does hold it to some importance. He spent 6 months studying the monsters and learning everything he can about the growth and the cult, and eventually set off to fulfill his mission, telling himself it was simply for the good of humanity. His new form was twisted yet sturdy, disgusting yet perfect for his mission. He would never tire, never feel fear, hunger, nor thirst, and he was allowed to keep his mind and memories to use as fuel for his campaign. An otherworldly energy enveloped his internal structure, glowing out of his eyes, a pale light echoing that which made him. I don't think I need to add anything there. The protagonist's goal becomes to kill the throne and save Earth. Also, as you've probably noticed, there's a fair bit of typos, and other mistakes among the written text of this game. I'm not going to criticize anyone for it, because I suspect it was all written by the one person who made the entire game, someone going by the alias SmoothBrainDev. I'm going to be ignoring them, but also haven't fixed any of them in my script. Each level is preceded by a screen with an image depicting the level title and a short text passage. These passages are quite inconsistent, so I'm not sure how exactly to treat them. Some of them are in third person, some of them talk at you, and some of them are in first person. I'm going to be assuming everything in third person is absolute truth. E1M1 is called Hole in the Sky, and the description reads as follows. A lone building within a cocoon of flesh, a prison for its last inhabitant. One man struggles with the last remaining scraps of his humanity, dissecting the growth's creations to understand his own body and his foes. As if beckoned, he prepares for a journey back to where he became something other than human. I see two important information here. The first is that Healer is not human. The other one is how a cocoon is a place where metamorphosis takes place, and that's not necessarily that of the protagonist, but we'll come back to this a lot later. The level picks up where the cutscene left off, inside the apartment, where Healer has taken shelter for 6 months. There are these glowing fissures, especially around the first level, which, when interacted with, tell us something. These are usually mechanical tutorial messages, but it's these little shimmering orbs that are more interesting here. The game calls them lore bits, and we get another message when we examine one for a couple of seconds. Examining the barred window says, "It's been 6 months since the relocation. 6 months of watching it all change. I'm leaving today." Nothing really new here, so let's keep moving. We see several expired specimens nailed to operating tables, which we'll later find out are actually enemies we fight in the game. A Rustborn, Clinker, Maw, and Terminator, and this boiler-looking thing is a part of a conservator. Our body is capable of double jumping, and the way this tip is written makes it sound like this is a new ability granted to us by the throne. In this room, there is a whiteboard where Healer was taking notes on his findings. Not alive, no mercy. It replaces everything. Not real steel, organic fabrication. Hearing voices, not hungry. Blade cuts it perfectly. Can't use their guns, guns biolocked. Stay sane, damn it. These messages show us what exactly the protagonist's loss of humanity means. The growth is capable of perfecting his organism, but this also tethers him to the will of the grafting throne, presumably, and removes some agency and sanity. There's also a lore bit here saying, all of it is made from a single material. I can't make heads or tails from it. It is a master of imitation, an alchemic miracle. The term alchemic miracle here will be quite important, much later. But even without this context, it has some meaning. The word used here was specifically alchemical. Not chemical, not biological, not physical. It was alchemical. This word has connotations of not being a hard science, but something more spiritual and occult. To me, this signifies the growth, and the throne are not just science fiction-y biological organisms, but something more sinister and eldritch. Furthermore, this talk, all of it is made from a single material, I initially took that everything around us in the game is made of the growth, but I now don't think this is the case. We don't really know this at this point, but so far only one city has been corrupted. My first impression was that all we see is all there is on Earth, but actually the Earth has not been consumed. Therefore, I now think only the rusty constructs and fortresses are made of the growth, while the more normal-looking ruined buildings are just that, ruined buildings from before the cataclysm. Besides, we also see other structures that were built by human hand, clearly from a long time ago as well. Hey everyone, this is me editing the video, and I somehow forgot to talk about the tally marks. Each of these tallies has 8 strokes on it for some reason, and there's 20 of them. 20 times 8 is 160, which is a bit more than 5 months. If each stroke is 1 day, which it tends to be in media, which is a bit short of 6 months, it could also be a kill count, it could be whatever, right? I just thought I'd mention that. The blockaded door is blown open by a squad of Rustborn, releasing us from the safe haven Healer has made for himself. These monsters look like basic futuristic grunts with cybernetic elements and wielding a laser weapon. Their bestiary description reads: the first responder military forces, those among the first to fall victim to Growth's rapid infestation, became the blueprint for Growth's army. The body is collected, and a mesh of rust-like cocoon manifesting from the particles in the atmosphere. It soon envelops the melting carcass, rapidly forming them into a mindless and weaponized drone for the ever-growing army of flesh and steel. They wield the Growth-born replications of a laser rifle and combat armor, but their mass-produced and sluggish bodies make them a threat only in large numbers. This description I find quite enlightening. It tells us that Growth doesn't just infect and corrupt things by physical contact, there's an airborne agent to it. The next level is actually where we see bodies and organic matter being processed and burned, polluting the atmosphere with said agent. The material to reconstruct the Rustborn from a dead body comes from the air itself. Just down the corridor, we meet the Sycophant, a juggernaut-looking melee brute. Many of the fortunate ones who weren't swallowed by the Growth went mad from the sight of living flesh and melting bodies in the toxic atmosphere. Seeking salvation, they began to worship Growth as their god. They were gifted an organ to replicate saw blades and armor to survive in the hostile atmosphere, so they may collect more survivors and intact bodies to be broken down and reassembled. The most interesting thing to me about this description is that these enemies aren't actually Growth-born. They're basically normal humans with equipment made from Growth. The story beats we've discussed so far are very reminiscent of stories by Lovecraft, an ancient cult towards some strange paranormal entity, unearthing said dormant entity, making its powers run rampant, an all-consuming and assimilating faceless and formless threat in the form of Growth. It's worth noting that neither the throne nor Growth itself are gods, so in this way the story charts its own course, but we'll learn more of that later. We fight our way through the apartment complex, most of it infested with Growth. Some electric-looking devices down there allow us to open the door to freedom. These too are Growth-born and serve some incomprehensible purpose beyond us. We can step outside the building and an ambush force jumps out of these metal container-looking things. We face another new enemy here, the Pustule. They are stationary turrets that kind of just look like a head growing out of the ceiling and spitting out fast explosive nails. Pieces of weaponized Growth, attached to hard surfaces, acting as a defense system for all Growth-influenced structures. As is the case with almost all of Growth, its vaguely human-like visage has been combined with modified man-made weaponry. These abominations fire rods of superheated steel that explode soon after hitting their target. It seems that all living constructs of Growth seem to take some, sometimes vaguely humanoid form, yet the source of their aberrant form doesn't seem to always come from humans. This description isn't interesting in the grand scheme of things, beyond suggesting this monster imitates the form of some non-human organism, and we will see several such beings later on. Outside, we can see several different structures and machines. Particularly of note is this spire sparkling with orange energy. I don't know if it does anything particular, it's just a visual motif we will see repeated in many Growth-controlled structures. One of the first power-ups can be picked up here, this orange orb of energy, which gives us a lot of health and increases our melee damage until the end of the level. This will actually be somewhat relevant later on. A further room holds these coffin-looking containers with unfinished Rustborn and a lore bit. The steel grows on their flesh, wires meet their nerves, eventually resurrecting the body with none of their mind left intact. We get to witness here a vertical slice of the process mentioned earlier, how Growth takes material from the atmosphere itself to create new bodies for the war machine. There's also this big, rotating sphere. I don't think it's important, I just thought it looked cool. Clinkers are our next adversary. Fast and small little spider-like amalgamations of flesh and steel. Reanimated bodies which represent the growth's army's attack dogs. Within their opened chest cavities hides a 3-barreled nail cannon, which they use to slow down the last survivors, so they may devour their bodies and turn their flesh into even more nails. Curious contraptions impossible to make heads or tails of. This description is an early sign to something, which will become much clearer later on. Growth itself doesn't have any grand or intelligent goal beyond just consuming, learning, and growing stronger. The clinkers kill things for no other reason than being able to kill more things. This is not that dissimilar from how, biologically speaking, the only purpose of life on Earth is to survive, generate offspring, and evolve. After this dark room, we use a strangely constructed fire escape to get back into the complex. We keep climbing to eventually reach the rooftop. Now we clearly see this SOS message on the side of the building. The tutorial message here is telling us to cut this disgusting pulsating tumor, more on those later. This causes a big bridge to lower across the chasm. Like the whiteboard message said, blade cuts it perfectly. The blade being the one on the spear saw. On the other side, we navigate through some more industrial and abstract tunnels before reaching the end of the level. This is represented by a face growing out of the actual wall, on a similar mesh as that we've seen on our protagonist, with the text Sector Lockdown. I have a lot to say about this, but we'll get back to this later, when we have more information. The next level is E2M1, Rust Organs. Most of the city's former inhabitants were gathered towards the Great Walls of Rust. Their bodies melt into the atmosphere, becoming one with their putrid grave. From its barren corridors, dark shadows and countless holding cages, the beasts toil endlessly to pursue their one true goal, to gather more victims so their numbers may grow ever more, to spread their rust organs throughout the entire planet. This is the level taking place in one of the factories, which converts dead bodies into the airborne growth agent, which then lets it construct new troops and more factories, or organs. It looks like a properly decrepit industrial building, straight out of Quake 2, but it's constructed entirely of growth. Near the start, one of the secrets is in a little hole, surrounded by dead bodies, with a clinker inside. I think this little hole is the den of said enemy, and there's a few more narrow little side passages where clinkers attack too. We also start seeing these barrels full of gore and viscera, which I don't think have any grander purpose beyond just being a container of materials, not unlike oil barrels for humans. In the next room, there is a lore bit on a mass of flesh connected to something with a cable. Living tissue turned into a network of information banks. My every step, every breath, every empty casing left behind is being tracked. This is the first time we get a sign that growth is observing healer and is capable of analyzing and learning from data. Scattered throughout the facility are these little devices, and in this room, healing stims are placed on top of them. Therefore, I suspect these machines fabricate said stims, which implies, in turn, that whatever these healing items are made of is growth derived. I don't think this is much of a surprise. The color of the red matter inside is quite reminiscent of growth. A force field is blocking the path forward, so we take a detour down this blood-lined corridor where the blood-addled attack us for the first time. A vicious combination of never-ending thirst and sense-enhancing biomodifications. They prowl the desolate streets to fill their great syringes with the blood of the victims, siphoning it directly into their system. This serves to only increase their thirst, and their glutton numbs their sense of pain. They have been observed to reanimate after apparent death. Reason for this is most likely the biomechanical parasite attached to their spinal column. I'm struggling to understand what these beings are, or what their purpose is. My best guess is that they work as gatherers, or cleaners of blood specifically. That final passage is totally true. These enemies will get back up to attack you after dying once. You can prevent this by jibbing or otherwise dismembering them. In this little secret hole, there is a purple power-up called the Carnage Accelerator, which increases your attack rate. I don't think this one has any lore relevance. The next room of significance has several devices, seemingly powered by this yellow energy. A corpse looks like it's burning, or as if something is being siphoned out of it. A lore bit on it says, "The thing above must be cut. The minds sealed within the cocoon are part of the growth's nervous system that keeps this machine hell functioning." Upstairs, right above the body, is the tumor spoken of, and cutting it shows the message, "Machine tumor incised. Force fields offline." This is the only tumor in the game I can remember, which has a corpse associated with it. All the other ones are just alone. Therefore, I think what we saw here was the process of trapping a human's mind inside of the tumor, for it to work as part of the automatic nervous system. When we return back downstairs, we see the yellow effects are gone, but the lore bit doesn't change. As we go back down the bloody corridor, these little cells have opened. Inside are some sad beings called Incompatible. Shambling victims of growth experiments. They seem to have some scraps of their past life intact, as they still react with emotion to stimuli such as pain and sight. Pieces of unfinished metallic armor has grown onto their body, and their organs have been partially replaced with tubes and wiring. They travel often in pairs, preferring another's company. The few old surviving scriptures of the old cult mention a holy process of healing, making two things into one, possibly alluding to the grafting throne's ability to combine things into a new form. Maybe these poor subjects are still seeking the grafting throne to be reborn. A lore bit in the air between a pair of them reads, "Incompatible and lost, born as failures, spat out by the flesh, easy prey for the nail spitters." Those being the clinkers. Most of them seem to wander in pairs. The last sentence there makes reference to that ancient occult scripture of making two things into one. These Incompatible are failed attempts at building something. A soldier, a worker, or anything in between. I don't think they have much lore significance. They appear rarely, kind of as set dressing. If anything, they seem to represent the remnants of the ancient cult, or just helpless but faithful servants. The rest of the level has us traverse some more industrial machinery. Crushers, furnace, you get the gist. The final room holds another tumor, but this one looks different. The color is darker, and it even has a screen on it. I think this is supposed to be a command center for the entire factory, probably a main control panel of sorts. This is why cutting it triggers an alarm, and waves of enemies spring an ambush. The final one involves two Terminators. An unfortunate case of Growth's attempts at creating a bipedal tank. Their bodies are full of solidified unknown substance, which gives them a subdermal bulletproof armor and houses a hefty payload of warheads. Their skulls have been kept intact and well visible for the opposition, possibly for demoralization purposes, but true demoralization is felt when facing their rear end. Nothing to add here. They sure have a gyat, if you know what I mean. The next three levels are pretty light on story. Feral Armament takes place deeper down the facility. Furnace for the failures and rejects. Their bodies are burned, absorbed back into the atmosphere. Distant voices of something loud and fierce are echoing in the walls. You feel even less welcome than before. This is a very short level in which we encounter a new enemy, the Maw. A combination of an experimental plasma-based military armament and performance-enhancing exoskeleton. The body in the middle is used as a sort of processing unit and a container for the cannon's unstable ammunition. Their legs are heavy and clumsy, but give them an ability to use rocket boosters to slide around their opponent to keep them on their toes. This is a creature which almost seems more mechanical than it is organic. The meat feels unnecessary and vestigial. When we reach the main furnace of this facility, a huge new foe leaps down for a boss fight. The titular Feral Armament's description says, "As seen with the Incompatibles and on the Blood-Addled, few of Growth's creations seem to stay sentient on some level. Whatever this massive specimen was meant to become after this full transfiguration is left a mystery. It seems to know nothing but rage and hatred for the healer, and Growth fails to contain him. leaving him to rampage through the rust organs, looking for his nemesis. Growth's hive mind conveys objectives to its creatures, and this one seems to have been given the simple task of dispatching Healer, the one who does not belong among the Rustborn kin. He does not go down easily. That sure was a lot of words to say very little. This asshole hates you specifically and nothing else is known about him. He sure is ugly and wields a lot of armaments. Once we're done with him, an exit opens up, but we're not out of the woods yet. Blood Totems is up next. A great tower of blood and bone has risen out from the transformed city block, although it doesn't seem alive. Very little of the city remains as is, and almost everything has been transformed to become part of the growth's rust organs. My goal lies deep, deep underground. There is not a single lore bit in this entire level. We start out still in the factory, fight our way through some more hallways and rooms, which seem pretty similar to what we've seen so far. Cutting another TV tumor breaks the floor from underneath us, and we're let into the city proper. Like the text prelude says, a lot of it is taken over by both growth and the rust organs, which makes parts of the level feel quite similar to the previous ones. That being said, after fighting through some alleyways and warehouses, we drop down into a flesh pit. This shows us how growth has some use for the architecture and infrastructure of the city, but replaces things it doesn't need, like the earth itself. Down here, we can find Kitty, laying on top of a bigger Kitty. This thing is a weapon, but also a little fish-like organism, and these two specimens are the only two in the entire game. The pickup message says, "I shall call her Kitty," implying Healer picked her up with intent to domesticate this creature, and the next message says, "Kitty feeds on fresh blood. Jib enemies and shower in their blood to feed your new pet." Double exclamation mark, which has even more unnerving connotations. That being said, indeed, jibbing enemies leaves behind this red residue, which can be collected as ammo, because it is a weapon and even has its own bestiary description. A species of a completely unknown origin, it seems to have been born from growth, just like its other monsters, but no signs of mechanical constructs or weaponry is found in its body. It is a sentient, thinking, hard-willed creature, with a mannerism of a large stubby-legged cat. Two of its kind have been observed, Kitty being the only survivor of the pair, and she seems to be still half-grown compared to her mother. Kitty feeds mainly on freshly extracted blood, preferring to absorb blood particles from the air for sustenance and self-defense purposes. Its ability to crystallize the blood into many different forms baffles all scientific understanding. Kitty is extremely defensive of her owner and spits extremely volatile blood crystals at any possible threat, yet her even more baffling ability is to spit something resembling a lightweight saw blade, which she can steer towards opposition with her mind or some other unknown and invisible force she may possess. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because this description makes it very clear this character isn't something meant to be taken too seriously. It's just a fun weapon with a fun design and fun interactions, and doesn't have much lore implications or relevance. There's nothing in the game that suggests there's anything more to her. Fighting further down this flesh pit, growth is taking new forms. The environment starts looking not just like a scary, all-consuming organism, but also some kind of new ecosystem, with these little spuds or flowers, vine-like organic structures, and even random little rustborn machines. To climb out, we will have to navigate these jump pads, and there are figures looming over us. They look like sculptures, but they're clearly growth-born creations. They look similar to another character we'll encounter later, suggesting to me growth is reusing a similar template. These two we see here are half-grown, unfinished, or maybe even failed beings, as they're incapable of doing anything. We now reach the area with the spire from the intro text. If this really is a totem, I doubt its existence has any utilitarian purpose. Totems are objects of religious and cultural significance, not tools or appliances for anything. The description of the Terminator enemy makes it clear growth understands psychological warfare, so maybe this is another way of inflicting fear on unturned humans. Or maybe the structure is simply how growth has reached the surface. I wish I had more to say about this level, but most of it is just going around these random and unremarkable or growth-created corridors and rooms. At the top of our ascent in this section is a button, which topples one of the buildings, revealing this very odd hole. A hidden path was uncovered at the base of the crumbled building, says the message. A few more enemies to dispatch along with some incompatible, and the level ends. I know this might seem like a strange thing to be drawing attention to, but I was wondering why there are green lights around this hole, which is a rare visual accent in this game. They are also present on jump pads, and this suggests to me this isn't very important. Jump pads in games usually are just jump pads. There is no wider context or information. But if I had to speculate, the green presence in a certain location we'll get to later suggests they are the result of otherworldly technology, stemming from the grafting throne. This outlet for growth has been covered up by building over it, hopefully sealing it away to never escape. The Filth Pit is the next level. The earth has been hollowed out, housing a newly formed structure, a heavily fortified checkpoint between here and the research site. The sea of flesh spawns toxin into the air, and the filth seeps out of the false steel of its structures. The rust organ spits its molten steel into the vast caverns of filth, and the hot air stinks through my metallic chassis. Make haste, their numbers are growing rapidly. This level is not a natural cavern. It was opened and hollowed out by growth and its spawn, and it itself is organic. The walls are not rock, they are flesh or fake rust. The structure inside is not a roadblock or a blockade or a barricade. It is a checkpoint. A checkpoint is a location that restricts travel and movement, but doesn't prevent it entirely. Instead, everything or everyone moving through it is meant to be controlled somehow. That being said, I struggle to see how any of this is a checkpoint. It is far too intricate and winding. And where exactly is the movement supposed to be taking place? We get through the level by use of a ventilation duct. The artificial constructs feel like part of the rust organ, just settled in a different environment. A lower bit on this pipe tells us some sort of respiratory system. There is a faint sound of wind moving in the pipes, a rare blessing of having no human lungs anymore. This, combined with the description of how the airborne growth agent is being pumped into this area and how molten metal is spilling into parts of it, suggests to me this level is either the ground of intense terraformation by growth or a spawning grounds, or both. The checkpoint takes form of the hostile environment and monsters themselves that a human with normal human lungs would be unable to pass through. This is why the description drew attention to their numbers. Conversely, the spawn of growth is able to leave to ravage the outside, while letting incompatibles back in to seek the throne. The first part of the level involves us ascending the structure and pressing a button to reveal the ventilation duct. The second part is this winding slog of abstract corridors and rooms that blends together in my brain. This is probably one of my least favorite parts of the game. I always forget how long and monotonous it is. It looks like part of E1M2, but with a green haze this time. This is where we will first notice this strange mechanism. It looks like an otherworldly clock, and my best guess as to what this is an internal clock for the machinations of growth as a whole. The level ends by, you guessed it, cutting another face. E1M5 is up next, Nerve End. A recently discovered ancient burial site, many incomprehensible discoveries made here. The Hollow Earth led us deep into its core where we discovered their object of worship. Now they have sealed my way downwards with their hideous technology. I must cut them down, every single one, and then fulfill my mission. A nerve end is the part of a nerve connected to cells or other nerves, sending information forward. My first instinct was that this name is referring to how we must cut through tumors to unlock the big lift and take it down in this level, and I think that is the most likely interpretation. We start in a rust organ-esque arena, which feels like an extension of the previous level. Opening the gate, We emerge into another huge cave, this one seeming more natural. The lift is surrounded by statues of robed figures, which we will be seeing a lot more of, and also incompatible, seemingly left stuck and stranded. A lore bit on this old card says, last remaining records of visitors to these grounds were from 1700s. Victims of plague following an old rumor in hopes of a divine cure. This puts an upper limit on how far back the titular cult from the Death Cult Vestiges episode name was created. Given that these people were following rumors, I would suspect the actual cult came even earlier than that. Why does Healer know this? Because they were one of the archaeologists who traversed and investigated this site and walked this road before. This description also draws parallels to this repeating theme in Lovecraft-inspired works, in which ancient and terrible knowledge is discovered about some hidden occult mechanism humanity has no sense of now. If you've been following my channel, you know I'm a big fan of Lovecraft's contributions to literature and culture in general. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of his work, because reading them today, many of them feel kind of like pastiches of cosmic horror, and I have yet to read one that truly scared me. However, there is something that speaks to me about the various concepts and themes originating from his twisted mind, about humanity's encounters with something truly unknown. And when I say unknown, I'm not talking about how in modern sci-fi films and shows you have aliens that speak a foreign language and have a different culture. I mean entities properly enigmatic and incomprehensible. Godlike beings existing in many more dimensions than just 3 or 4, whose true forms are imperceptible to humans. Paranormal forces of such power and sentience that our race are mere ants to them. All-consuming, assimilating, and grotesque creatures that would easily conquer the entire world. This story has a ton of beats inspired by Lovecraft's stories. The unearthing of ancient knowledge, a corrupting biological and omnipresent force that transforms everything it can into its own twisted vision of reality. A dark cult dedicated to said force, hoping to buy itself into its good graces, and a truly otherworldly being of unimaginable power in the grafting throne that can't even be communicated or reasoned with. If we look up, a mass of flesh and eyes is an intake for 2 nerve-like cables. The hint tells us the nerves keep this elevator from moving. Find and cut down their source. Following one of them leads us to this large burial site with plenty of tombs and gravestones. I doubt the people being buried here knew exactly what they were getting into. I suspect they just had vague notions of being divinely saved or reborn, and it was the cult who knew more of the specifics, which I'm sure some of those coming here were indoctrinated into. One of the tombs is opened with a lever and has a gravestone inside saying, "Here lies Caleb, may he live again." In case you don't know, this is a reference to the game Blood.
I live again.
Following this path around the cave, we reach the upper level and encounter this new enemy, the Conservator. The growth devours, learns, improves, imitates. These specimens seem to wear imitations of the garbs of the Forgotten Cult, worshippers of the Grafting Throne, which became the ground zero for Growth's invasion. If Growth has any sense of hierarchy among its ranks, these ones must be their high-ranking officers. Their bodies move slowly, but they compensate with a weapon that fires bursts of homing disc-like explosives. Note to anyone reading, kill it with fire. This description doesn't give us much backstory on anything. The most interesting insight is that this robe they're wearing looks like that of the cultists. We also see this theme of absorption and imitation, which will be quite important later. This monster reminds me so much of the Vors from Quake. They're both combinations of a spider-like lower body and humanoid upper body, and they both attack using homing projectiles. The first nerve end is the organic tumor situated amidst another eye-filled flesh pit. I think these eyes represent a sort of nervous activity. They are quite complex organs, and being observed by an eye makes our monkey brain feel like they are being perceived by some sentience as well. Therefore, I feel like this is a nexus of cognitive ability. Again, the growth learns and imitates. When the tumor is cut, the hint literally tells us nerve cluster incised, one more to go. The second lane takes us through more Rust Organ-esque environments, before forcing us to trudge down this blood-filled sewer. The tumor, this time, is the TV variant, and I'm starting to think that these two flavors represent the two sides of growth's creations, biological and technological. That's not quite always adhered to. For example, in the Rust Organs, is this organic tumor, though it seems like it's just been made, so who knows. Once we get back to the main lift, it automatically starts descending and taking us into a huge open chamber, again surrounded by this malformed being hanging from the side of the wall, which actually reminds me a lot of the Gatherers from Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Some incompatible have made their way here through unknown means, and the level ends. We are now deep into the lair of the beast, and all that's standing between us and the finale is the grounds of the death cult vestiges themselves. Despite being the ground zero of Growth's awakening, this place has been left almost untouched by its putrid influence. I hear rumbling all around resonating from even deeper underground. The sacrificial well is ahead, where we once climbed down together. They never expected me to get this far. This level starts off by us leaving the cave and entering the ruins of the cult grounds. One asset quite common to this area is this mass of flesh, consuming several coffins. A nearby lore bit on a grave tells us what is happening. Many perished, waiting for their turn to be welcomed by the throne. They now lie here along with their sworn companions, to eventually become roots to a new world. It seems that these pilgrims, let's say, saw being consumed by the throne as a divine act, and probably the ultimate goal of their religion was to bring about a rapture-esque world-changing event of the throne taking over all of Earth. And if they couldn't become part of the initial burst, at least they would become fodder for further stages of the plan. This level feels kind of like an unholy cathedral type of environment, with burial grounds, fortifications, gates, places of worship, communion, mass and study. There's a secret behind a weakened wall here, which leads into a crypt of sorts with two tiny skeletons and a lore bit. The dead were carried into the catacombs in a desperate attempt to arouse that which made two things into one. This further supports my view of how the cult seemed to operate, and is probably one of the most grim secrets in the game. Breaking the wall also reveals a clinker, which might have some significance to this location, but I'm not really sure what, beyond being the thing that came to eat the corpses. Or maybe it's what the corpses turned into, which is even darker to think about. Several times, the cathedral architecture forces us to negotiate the cavernous catacombs with tight and oppressive geometry. At one point, we erect a stone monument and ride it to the top ramparts, which one could see as the dead metaphorically rising us up to progress. Flipping this lever unlocks a previously hidden inner sanctum location, where scholars partook in recording and absorbing knowledge. One of the open manuscripts reads, "The throne which came from heaven above, chariot of a repentant God, granted the holy men most wondrous new form, healed many, sick or dead, sleeps now." It would appear that the antagonist of this episode has paused its work at some point during the cult's operations, created something, and then fell into a long slumber. The way forward is blocked by another huge gate, so we blast and slice our way through more unholy chambers. A lone incompatible seems unable to flip the next lever, which reveals this gigantic cave filled with more failed experiments. A second feral armament ambushes us here, possibly the source of the rumbling mentioned in the text prelude, as the first one also was foreshadowed in a similar manner. Slaying the beast grants us access to the Well of Sacrifices. Dropping down, we immediately notice something is off. Whatever plummets down the well falls into this strangely colored and pulsating liquid, which actually builds up some kind of status effect on us. Falling further down, we find ourselves in a very natural cave, in which is another very primitive burial site, and these alien-looking sculptures. Flipping a lever to progress actually makes them spring limbs and start attacking us. These are some of my favorite designs in the game, because the combination of a stone sculpture and the organic looking elements make them look so eldritch and otherworldly. we're actually going to skip the description for now, because it contains a lot of elements that will be very confusing and unclear at this point in the story. Getting hit by their projectiles builds up the same status effect, which is essentially blood loss from Dark Souls / Elden Ring. One last obstacle before the final level, one more gate. One more frantic ambush by stone men and conservators signaled by this blood-curdling scream. I actually didn't notice that as I was playing, but there's another gatherer figure in the back here, which will make another being look very familiar very soon. A second scream signals the gate is fully open, letting us pass through and end the level for the first time without cutting a face. The final level of the episode is called Throne Firstborn. The atmosphere here is heavy and burning, almost no oxygen left. Long wails of some godless creature echo as I step through the great gates. Forgotten praises and promises of ascension and God's birth carved on great slabs. The grafting throne is just ahead. Whatever the throne had spawned, I must kill it. Then I shall cut down the throne itself for good. This level is just a boss fight, but there's still a lot of valuable lore in the start. The final crypt, before the big bad, has some stone tablets carved with text. One lore bit says, "The grafting throne awaits ahead. Surrender yourself to its embrace and be reborn. Your pilgrimage is over." The second, "Flesh of two will be made into one. All impurities extracted from your body and soul, fed to the throne's firstborn, visage of the coming new world." The third and final, and possibly most important one. "The devils walk these grounds. They seek to take the throne from you. The firstborn protects us. He is the flesh that takes all." I will refrain from interpreting these for now, because a lot is about to happen, and we can tie up a lot of things at once. As we step forward into a grand darkness, the throne's firstborn is revealed to us, a body that literally looks like flesh of two made into one, and the throne subtly visible behind it. The monster itself doesn't do anything, instead it is these 4 stationary turrets doing most of the fighting, which actually kind of look like robed cultists to me, but I could be tripping. When they go down, the firstborn falls over, exposing its brain that can only be damaged by the blade on our spear saw. When enough damage is dealt, the firstborn recoils, the turrets rise up again, and this whole process must be repeated 2 more times. This is the figure I believe the Gatherer creations take the form of, visage of the coming new world, after all. When we're done, the second cinematic plays out. Healer steps over the carcass of the creature and prepares to destroy the throne. There is yet another burial site, right at its foot, but a flash stops us. 3 figures stand between us and the target, none of them looking like any growth-born monsters we've seen so far. Drawing a gun, the protagonist is stopped by the bellow of the mighty bell, wielded by the biggest of the lot, and falls down to their knees. Hey everyone, this is me editing the video again. I am interrupting the video again because I just noticed that you can actually see the throne disappearing in the next shot. This is quite important. I will not elaborate. Soon, a white sphere or explosion expands and envelops a large part of the city, before showing us glimpses of pyramids floating in the sky. We can also see a large mound of growth, which is probably the flesh cocoon we initiated the game in, however long ago this feels like by now. I know this is a lot to consider, but this is the end of episode 1, so let's start bringing this all together. Let's begin with the figures in the ending. I won't go into detail right now why this is clear, but they are a third, or I guess a fourth party, that is not aligned with neither the throne, growth, or the protagonist. I will be referring to them as the Malicant. I'm not going to go into detail right now as to what they are, as we'll learn a lot more about them in episode 2, so if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button. They were the ones who planted the throne where it was, and maybe even created it. Whatever their goals are, the throne was doing what they wanted, so they can't have Healer cut it down. Let's work our way backwards, through the final 2 levels. I think some people, whom would later form the cult, witnessed the Malekith granting them the throne, and would worship it, since the manuscript earlier talks of how it was brought from the heavens. This could suggest they somehow communicated the powers of the throne to the would-be cultists, but even if they didn't, it makes sense why they would lay their dead to rest next to a divinity, and soon find out what the artifact was capable of. The throne would start forming its firstborn. As per the tablets, people pilgrimaged over to this location to become part of the creature, which they saw as a purifying and divine act. The cultists were aware of the Malekith. They are the devils, which technically own the throne. The purpose of the firstborn was to protect the throne from them, and why that was, we shall find out later. The many sets of burial grounds we find as we approach the throne suggest to me that there were actually several cults built on top of each other, 2 at the very least. There's a clear distinction as we go down the Well of Sacrifices. The filth looks different and has different properties. The stone men feel unlike anything else we've seen so far, and we even have to contend with a new toxic affliction. Moreover, how was anyone supposed to pilgrimage down this drop? I think the cult at some point built the structure, and there was no talk of traveling to the throne anymore. This is just where they started dropping sacrifices. One of the tracks that plays in this level is even called Different Face, Same Faith, and I don't see how this could refer to anything but the cult taking different forms over time. The cult became less about the death and more about the worship. They built this cathedral and started keeping books. It was now necessary to take turns for people to be sacrificed. They've turned into a bureaucratic machine, possibly because the throne fell asleep, or so they believed. Word of the miracles performed here traveled far and wide, and eventually access to the cult itself was denied. And that's where the newcomers started being laid. What I find interesting about the cult is that they seem to have had no idea about growth. They talk of the throne, the Malekith, the firstborn, and that seems to be the extent of it. No growth monsters, no rust organs, no flesh cocoons. They did believe the throne would somehow consume everything alive on Earth, but that could also just have meant we would all become part of the firstborn. I think the robed figure depicting in the statues could be an ambassador Malekith that the cult believed was the divinity to have brought down the throne for them. Let's now start concluding things, because this is all I have to say about episode 1. To sum up the story so far, an unknown faction called the Malekith have brought down the grafting throne on Earth for unknown reasons so far. A cult forms around it and witnesses how the throne is capable of transforming several humans into one creature. They see this as a divine and purifying act, so they lay their dead there and dedicate places of worship to what they see as a chariot of the gods. For now, all the throne does is create a firstborn organism to protect itself from the Malekith in particular, for reasons we'll get to later. Pilgrims and sacrifices alike arrived to become part of the machine, but at some point the throne fell dormant. The cult eventually faded away, and the sands of time buried it deep underground. In modern times, archaeologists uncovered the sacred grounds, and one of them was the protagonist of the game. Their presence awakened the throne, and a hideous growth consuming everything and everyone, except for the player character, who got rebranded instead. They became a superhuman killing machine, and a special blade grew out of their bone. Growth quickly took over the entire city, and Healer became trapped in a flesh cocoon, where they spent 6 months studying themselves and the sick creations of Growth. They found Growth was a super material, capable of incredible imitation and impossible versatility. A strike team arrived at his doorstep, beckoning them to start their journey back down whence all of it came. He fights out his prison and enters the Rust Organs. This is a facility constructed entirely by and from Growth, which burns up bodies and emits an airborne agent into the atmosphere, which lets the Eldritch Horror construct more soldiers and terraform environments wherever the air can reach. The corrupted cityscape is up next, where one of a two-of-a-kind creature is adopted by Healer as a pet and weapon. Descending underground, a spawning zone is the first obstacle. and beyond that is the dig site and several flavors of cult ruins. Eventually, the protagonist reaches the heart of the corruption, cuts down the firstborn protecting the throne, but is stopped by a squad of Malekith. And what happens later, we will only find out in episode 2. Thanks for watching. Episode 2 of Incision is probably the most lore-heavy of the three, and features the most revelations about the nature of the villains in this game. There will be a lot of important information dumps in the bestiary descriptions, and a lot of cryptic lore bits as well. That being said, before we jump in, I want to address a few things from the last video. First of all, the creator of the soundtrack to Incision left a comment to make it clear that the meaning behind different face, same faith is in reference to the second feral armament fight and nothing else. Also, while watching back the footage, I noticed these two skeleton amalgamations down in the crypt. This would imply the throne did create more composite beings than just the firstborn during the cult's operations, which is not what I initially thought. I also wanted to clarify that the bestiary is unlocked when finishing the entire game, and I would suspect the descriptions are written with the assumption that you'd have experienced all 3 episodes. This is why I'm skipping over some of them or cutting parts out. I also want to stress that I do not know everything there is to know about this game. The game doesn't track what lore bits you have read, nor could I find any video or guide for them all. I'm exploring the levels pretty thoroughly, and I'm looking through all the secrets, but I could be missing some for all I know. Also, I somehow forgot to mention the episode names, because they're not particularly enlightening, and also there's at least one level in each of them bearing the same name. For completeness sake, the first episode is called Death Cult Vestiges, the second one is Death Filth Medicine, and the final one is Death Storm Havoc. The cutscene hitting off episode 2 is a montage of various shots. Not necessarily in this order. We see the crumbled city covered in growth, but something is different this time. It's connected with red tubes up to something in the sky, and the haze is grey, as opposed to red. A few shots of more Malekith beings, and some organic looking creation, as if in a test tube. This spud ends up growing a blade, just like the one of our protagonist. Another being has just been rebranded. This gives them a vision of Healer, whom also receives an impulse, and wakes up in a dark cave. So the first level begins, Harvest Vivarium. According to Cambridge Dictionary, a vivarium is a container, often with a glass front, in which small animals, especially small reptiles, are kept as pets or so that they can be studied. However, the word harvest suggests the purpose is different from a normal vivarium. This level name already tells us something of what is happening. Whatever location we're in now is a part of the city that has been separated from the rest by someone, possibly the Malekith. The description reads, "My mind is in a haze. Was I transported somewhere? No, I can't stop and question it all. If the throne is still alive, I must keep moving." As the firstborn died, I felt my body and mind shudder uncontrollably. A screaming urge, a wish, for death filled my mind. I failed once. This cannot happen again. This tells us something has changed with the death of the firstborn, and it's affected Healer as well. Since he is a creation of growth now, after all. This change we shall see very shortly. Starting off in another cavernous burial site, we kick our way through some weakened walls and welcome Kitty again. A cavity we must traverse is now filling with the same darker, pulsating, dripping variant of growth that saps our health. A nearby lore bit draws attention to this apparent chemical reaction. The growth is liquefying, turning into something hideously toxic for my body. Smells like sulfur, yet it doesn't seem to affect the creatures. The final line there suggests to me whatever is happening is doing so by design. This first section of the level is a mishmash of various themes from episode 1. There's a few props from the cultist locations, a rust organ-esque section, and a few city props like trucks and shipping containers. The vivarium is crumbling. Getting out of the cave, we see we are indeed in the city from the cutscene, and the same features are present. A lore bit under a pile of rock says, "The whole city has become nothing but a pile of debris. The sky is ominous, without color. The air smells of metal. This is not the growth's doing, this is something different." Soon we will have to enter what seems like the Rust Organs again, and we get a glimpse of growth monsters still being created as they were. All of their structures are crumbling, yet they still keep assembling more forces, sign of automation or a new goal. When a question is posed like that, you know the second answer is correct. Previously, the goal of growth was to kill, consume, assimilate. Growth was self-serving, but now it is subservient to something instead. Clicking the button unleashes the small strike team and lets us progress. Winding our way through more rusty halls of blood and bone, the next point of interest is the closest thing we'll come to interacting with another human in this game.
This is emergency state broadcast program. This is non-live broadcast. Backup system in progress.
The situation here, man, it's totally chaotic. I don't know what I've been telling you, man, but I can't talk about it, or else I'm done.
What do you mean you're done for?
Don't say anything, dude. I still have to find my wife. I know, man. I know. Don't you think for a second that I ain't trying to survive just like you in this shithole, Kevin? As I told you before, I can't talk about it, but to give you an idea, we're barricaded with only a small amount of supplies left. We're soon going to have to leave outside, and we are all scared that they're going to take us with them.
Whoa, I'm trying to understand. Who is gonna take you? Are you really talking about the police or the government? Is it really worth the risk of trying to sneak out during martial law with all that security roaming the streets and the drones? You'll be shot if you get caught, no questions asked.
That's the thing, man. There's so what everyone think it is. Security, drones, even the laws, it all changed. Gone. Even the people. Every living creatures. I saw my friend's cat just bleeding. It just...
Bleeding?
It just went... Pop.
What do you mean? It's...
I don't fucking know. The cat just exploded. And there was metal in there.
Right, got it. Thought we were in the story.
I'm telling you, man, you gotta believe me. Not only that, but... That's enough, dude. Shut the fuck up about it. The fuck are you doing, man? Don't do that. You have left me no choice, Brad. They're gonna find us any minute now. They found us. You're gonna get us all killed, you moron. This ends now.
All right, roll commercial. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
This radio, playing on loop a recording of a news broadcast. A presenter is talking with one person trying to relay some information, while another is getting mad at them for making noise. They talk of a martial law imposed seemingly when growth begun its slow invasion in the shadows. However, the person on the radio is now convinced there's something more to this martial law and believes they're being hunted. They're hiding somewhere, and the noise is distressing the other guy, scared that they're going to be found, and shoot the person on the radio with a shotgun. The lore bit on the radio says, "The world outside the city has no idea what's going on. I will end this before they breach the city walls. I live for that single goal now." Unfortunately, I was a little disappointed at this point on my first playthrough. I was under the impression that growth has consumed most of Earth, and organized society is not a thing anymore. Here we have explicit confirmation, only one city has been corrupted, and I'd find it so difficult to believe that the army of whatever country this game takes place in hasn't figured out at all what's happening and reacted with excessive force. Sure, maybe growth has killed everyone that comes close, and there is no direct confirmation of the state of the city, but there's still satellites and other methods of surveillance. The broadcast talks of drones, and we even see jets flying around later in the game, so are you seriously telling me none of them got any visual confirmation that something extremely unprecedented and definitely paranormal has become of the city? How has this location not been nuked yet? This plot hole takes me a bit out of the game, and I find it more immersive to believe the Earth is in a similar state as it is in Doom Eternal. Most of humanity is probably dead, most of Earth is consumed and corrupted, and only small pockets of organized society still exist. Pressing onwards through the familiar machine hell, we actually go back into the ruined city block and drop down this pit full of dead sycophants. A makeshift barricade ahead, signs of struggle, and a single person with a saw blade inside of them. We seem to have found the transmitters of the message. A new weapon inside the suitcase, a triple-barreled shotgun. The lore bit says, the man on the radio seems to have been buying illegal arms. This jawbreaker is custom made. Exceptional work, seems to be designed for point-blank destruction. Heading back, the pit recesses and breaks open to reveal a fleshy passage downwards, lined with the green lights. And here's another sight we haven't seen before. A passive stone man in its active form with no AI and a red lore bit. For reasons we'll get to later, I believe these are the growth's attempts at communicating with Healer. As to why a stone man was chosen to be the avatar, I have a few ideas. The fact that their attacks have the same properties as the liquefied growth and are only harmful to Healer and not other creatures suggests to me they have some physical ability to interface with them. They feel like the most faceless and possibly oldest creations of growth on Earth, given so far we've only seen them in the closest proximity to the throne. They say, the throne's final command rang true, and so his heralds have come. Those marked by the herald's furious heart shall flee like madmen, and they shall turn to ashes if they were to ever falter in their flight. More than anything, this is a lore-friendly mechanical tip for what's just to come. Leaping further down, another tutorial message pops up, marked by a disastrous flame. The herald's heart must be cut with your blade. Find a way to reach it. Indeed, the herald spoken of is the enemy resting up above, a stationary amalgam of flesh and steel. Anomalies born from growth once its original hive mind had been destroyed. The shattered stone-like substance of their heads indicate that they could be what all the living statues in the old ruins could become one day. Their heart rumbles with growth's own form of electricity, and it seems to be able to weaponize it by concentrating it underneath their victims, resulting in an explosive reaction. The saw blade on its mechanical arm is identical to the sycophant's weapons, implying the growth has begun to learn ideas of iconography as well. The hive mind spoken of is the firstborn, and it's also the same hive mind mentioned in the feral armament bestiary description. I've skipped the description of that creature for now, but we will come back to it later. This one also gives us another reason why a stone man is heralding its presence, and tells us the orange energy is indeed an equivalent of growth's electric current. This final part of the level requires us to run around and flip a bunch of switches, while under constant pressure of explosions coming from the ground. If you stay still for too long, you will get smoked, which is exactly what we were warned of. When the buttons are pressed, a platform rises up, and lets us approach the herald to cut its heart. Also, I didn't notice this while playing, but it seems like getting hit by an attack from the herald caused a little bit of the blood steel status effect, further suggesting this is the final form of the Stone Man. The exit of E2M1 is surrounded by dead creatures we haven't encountered yet, appearing spindly and robotic. E2M2 is parasitic relations. Remnants of a place somewhat familiar to me. I feel different from my old self. Too different. These human-made structures are like a distant dream to me now. What remains of home is now being harvested upwards through the great vivarium pipes. My theory rings true. I am not in the city anymore. This description tells us exactly why these two levels are named this way. Something in the sky has captured and is consuming this fragment of the city. The images of a familiar place show Healer how much he's changed, and this familiar place is the shopping center this level takes place in. This location is particularly crumbling and overflowing with seeping filth. There's parts of it that look like they were going to become parts of a new rust organ, but everything now is being liquidated, like all else. We cut a TV tumor to open a fang gate to progress, and the second passive stoneman has something to say. The first children, they seek our flesh to consume us, We're failing, dying away, yet you carry our mantle, as it was intended. Indeed, as it was always intended. This message is why I believe these interactions are a communication of growth to healer. Growth is dying and something wants to consume it. But not healer. He carries their mantle, as someone intended. The other most interesting thing I can say about this section is the 2 Easter eggs. This hidden button unlocks this scene, which I don't know what this is a reference to. There's another hidden key, which opens this recess with an ink ribbon. Interacting with the typewriter does this. The final part of the level takes us through a tube of flesh, where we fight the same enemies we saw dead earlier. They are called sympaths, and I shall read their description soon. There's also 2 abandoned cars, with a corpse nearby, and a note saying, "Despite my failing body, feel a sense of happiness. I have a front row, witness beyond anyone's imagination. Monsters ignore me now. I could sit here, sleep for a while." It's probably quite self-explanatory. By the way, this note might probably be the easiest lore bit to miss in the game. I have played through the game 3 times, this level 4 times, and I only captured this on video once. This person came here to witness the sight of the next room. Inside this huge cavity is a herald already attacking us, and the level makes us run quite the gauntlet to hit the switch and lower its platform. Indeed, this is the intake for one of the pressure pipes, siphoning growth from the earth. The level ends when we get sucked in. We are about to find out what the parasite is. The next level is called Death Filth Medicine. Just like the episode itself, we are about to reveal a ton of information. Gathering space of the dying growth, it seems. This place, a ship? I see figures in the distance, and hear their incomprehensible voices. Everything around me feels and acts just as in their rust organs, yet it looks different. Perfected, shaped with intent. I am now in the belly of the beast, a place wholly unknown to me. My mission still remains unchanged. The throne must be here somewhere. I must kill it. This is the big reveal here. The Malicant are aliens.
No, okay, I'm not saying it's space aliens, right? But it goes without saying it's fucking space aliens!
I'm sorry if you figured this out earlier, and were getting annoyed at me for not bringing this up, but I am an especially dense motherfucker. And on my first playthrough, I wasn't certain until this description mentioned a spaceship. The aliens grabbed onto a part of the city, the part we've been playing through in the last 2 levels, and are now harvesting the dying growth off of it. Not only that, but their vessel itself is made of growth too. It's as if they are the masters of this fantastic substance, and it does their bidding. The fact that they came here on a ship made of growth already means they must have done this before, somewhere else. Starting the level, we drop down onto a cell of sorts, and come face to face with the devils from space. This particular variant represents the civilians, so to speak, and they are called the flock in the bestiary. The Malicant are old, death-fearing, withering creatures from beyond the stars. Their lives have been artificially elongated, living forever in the cycle of harvesting growth to create their precious medicine for themselves and their mother god. Living under fear of her watchful daughters, they have forbidden emotion, deviating opinion, and eventually their sense of self. Like insects, they live and die to defend this cycle, armed with energy-based chain guns and shotguns. Indeed, the 2 variants seen here have different color schemes, and this is in line with the weapon they wield. The description also talks of a matriarchal ruler of the flock, and we'll soon learn more about her. This also makes it clear why the Malicant needed the throne to be alive. With this new revelation in mind, let's now return to some points I said we'd come back to. Let's start with the description of the stone men. Not much info is available on these rare specimens. The stone seems to be hand-carved, resembling the 3 eyes seen on sycophants and incompatible masks and in many growth-infested spaces. The throne had been given by the Malicant to the old cult, a sort of cosmic parasite that would eventually devour the world, and these statues may have been ancient representations of the cosmic heavenly visitors. Their crimson projectiles react with Healer's body similarly to the toxic substance which growth emits once its hive mind has died, resulting in rapid blood loss to nourish the growth so it may give birth to a new mind, or until a fitting host has been found. The hive mind mentioned in this description, and that of the feral armament, is the throne's firstborn, by the way. I don't really know why the first line would read the way it does, other than to imply the creature in question is someone sentient. But most other creations are being controlled by the firstborn. The text also draws attention to how there's several beings with 3 eyes in this game, and this feature is based off the Malekith, which also proves that I was right in saying the cult did meet the devils. Unfortunately, the description for the throne's firstborn is where things go off the rails. The cult had sacrificed many to the growth, which seeped out of the grafting throne. The Malekith had told them that the grafting throne was a cradle of a god, so it was only natural that the cult felt obliged to feed the newborn. It grew and grew, and the weary, misused slave of the Malekith, that being the throne itself, could not control the growth, which seeped from the throne, yet it managed to implant a single mission to its simple mind: grow, get stronger, protect the grafting throne, so the Malekith may not come back for the grafting throne and enslave it again. After all, even the sky demons fear a titan of its scale. Over the centuries of isolation, the creature became the growth's hive mind, ready to convey his message to all of growth once it would be let free. Maybe this was predestined, as the Malekith had planted the grafting throne on Earth for the sole purpose of letting the growth run free and devour the world for them. Its hideous body was surrounded by the most loyal or most productive members of the cult, kings and queens, holy men, madmen and sycophants alike, who were granted a new body for the sole purpose of protecting the newborn. Let's start with the easy part. I was right in saying these turrets are former cultists. I was wrong in saying the throne controls growth, but then the description also contradicts this by saying it is able to give instructions to its creations. I don't like how some of these passages are written, because they sometimes just don't make much sense. Let's go back to the stone men. To nourish the growth so it may give birth to a new mind. Makes sense, but what about or until a fitting host has been found? Why is drawing blood supposed to help with finding a fitting host for the hive mind? I still haven't figured out what this part is supposed to mean. It would appear part of the cycle of devouring worlds by the Malekith is the creation and death of a hive mind, resulting in the liquidation of growth for harvest. This explains the change between the episodes, but doesn't explain why there is blood sapping growth down the well of sacrifices. I was wondering if this was due to the existence and destruction of a smaller hive mind back in the day, but there's no getting around the fact that the firstborn is the firstborn. Therefore, I think my best hypothesis for now is that these are remnants from before this creature became the hive mind, as the description makes it sound like it took a long time for that to happen. It's also necessary to note that we now know the throne isn't necessarily aligned with the Malekith, but more like a slave or a tool for them. Whether it has a will or not, it's able to act against them to some degree, which is why the firstborn was created, in its mind. I also believe the white sphere that enveloped us in the city in the cinematic from episode 1 was what brought us all up to the ship. Okay, let's get back to the level for now. One of the Malekith flips a switch to drown us in growth, but shooting this glowy thing opens the drain hatch and lets us pass through the pipe. The screen flashes white, as if we'd just discovered a lore bit, and we receive a seemingly telepathic message. Key wielder, my healer, finally. Someone, seemingly on the ship, is glad we found our way here. A bunch of dead flock litter the drain, and we come into contact with those flying enemies again. They are called sympaths, and their description reads: the few truly zealous of the Malekith kin were given a truly heroic duty to keep the sacred harvest vessels' labyrinthine chambers and pipes clean of any growth that could pose their ship any sort of threat. What scraps of growth the Malekith don't use for their medicines, they use its imitative abilities to keep their ancient ships running. Cleaning blades on their arms and a terrifying laser cutter attached to their third eye, they attack anyone who they don't recognize as their kin with animalistic instinct. These creatures are Malicant too, and their role of cleaning out tracts explains why they were the first of their race we had met. They were down in the city, making sure the flow of growth arrives unimpeded. I also think they recognized the person from the car as an obstruction, and that's why that was the first time we encountered them alive. We drop down into a pool of growth and emerge into what is probably a sort of sewer of the ship, or a staging facility, to gather and pack growth into these huge containers. Down in the liquid, it's also possible to find a huge hand emerging from the solid growth, but let's skip that for now. Unlocking the elevator out of here, we encounter a squad of what feels like special forces, the Cherished. Malicant mother gods would be daughters. Their bodies have been altered to give them perfected reflexes, speed and sight, so they can call out the wrong thinkers and intruders alike of their sacred harvest vessel. They wield a deadly sniper rifle and ability to teleport next to their opponent, showing their excellence in long range and close quarters combat alike. They are fast, vicious and evasive opponents, which actually feel quite similar to fight as the Black Ops from Half-Life 1. I wonder what it means to be a would-be daughter though. How can you exist while yet to become a child of someone? I think this is supposed to be taken metaphorically, in the sense that you can be a child to a god. Moving on, the ship we find ourselves in looks quite technically oriented. We don't see any living or communal spaces, everything looks like these abstract corridors and machines, similar to the rust organs, like the description said. We find ourselves yet another kind of floor bit, this one reddish grey, and looking as if liquid is pouring out of it. The Malnecris blooms, free of the dead old mind's control. Its fury unbound and aimless, the Malicant cannot contain it. Their precious medicine is given only to their mother god now. You might notice something very concerning. This is all a bunch of information Healer has no way of knowing, and it's written as if this was someone else's words. This brings us to the very uncomfortable question I did not want to have to consider. What the fuck even is a lore bit? Throughout episode 1, we've only seen the green variants. These are pretty clearly Healer's observations and thoughts, as they're both in first person and also written with only his knowledge in mind. This seems to be a respiratory system. The last records are from the 1700s. When they're not, they're things he's reading directly off of something. Therefore, I kind of just assumed a lore bit isn't anything physical in the actual world. It just represents Healer looking and thinking of something, or reading. This was challenged in episode 2, when I saw the red variants. They're pretty clearly messages from growth, possibly conveyed telepathically, or maybe even the Stonemen are actually talking to Healer. Now we find this yet another grey and drooping variant. It doesn't seem to be the growth's words, as the red lore bits never mentioned the Malicant by name, and talked of it as some mysterious, unknown force, and these do. If they aren't Healer's words, then how are these being relayed to him? If it was the same telepathic messages from before, I wouldn't think this would be a different entity in the world. This isn't just a stylistic change, by the way, as in this very level, we go on to find more green lore bits that are still clearly just Healer's thoughts. Anyway, as for the actual contents of this lore bit, the Malnecris is just what the Malicant call growth. It says the death of an old mind caused it to be unshackled, and now it does as it pleases. As a result, the ship, which is made from growth, is starting to crumble. What is this dead old mind? I don't think it's the firstborn, mostly because it feels like growth as an organism seems to work pretty slowly. It took it 6 months to devour a city, and even that wasn't enough for a complete transformation. Admittedly, we don't really know how much time has passed between the 2 episodes, but it doesn't feel to me like it was enough for the ship to change so much, compared to what we've seen so far. Therefore, I believe the dead old mind is something completely different. The ship is strewn with corpses of the flock, growth blooming out of their bodies, reflecting the Lorbit. It's as if so many are dying that the living can't keep up with disposing of them. Leaping through this very unsafe shipping area, we arrive in a location very much taken over by growth, and fight some familiar monsters. A green Lorbit on this three-eyed sculpture tells us what we've already been seeing. All of the ship seems to be molded from growth. Everything is barely intact, verging on collapsing upon itself. Its figures seem to mock them. We will have to fight our way through some more Malekith opposition before arriving at this locked gate. To open it, the control room must be accessed, but on the way there, we find another Lorbit on the corpse of this creature. No signs of life on these ones. Their skin is dry and flaking all over, turning to dust. Given that these individuals were not just discarded, and the bodies aren't blooming in the same way as those we've seen so far, it would appear this is what happens when the flock don't get their medicine and growth doesn't take over them. Beyond this gate, we find what they've been keeping sealed. Another telepathic message. The Malnekris Concentrator Hall. Such pretenses of sanctity. Desperate acts in the name of their mother god. From the pyramidal structure, red liquid seeps. It doesn't drain our blood, so I would make the assertion this is the final result of their medicine creation process, and the flock statues make it look like this is where their mother god would dispense the medicine for her servants. Indeed, the most central of the lot is the matriarch herself. The love of their matriarch instilled them with deep despair, an everlasting life of misery, so they feed her the worlds, so she may be rebranded. The way I interpret this Lorbit is that eternal life is a curse, so the Malekith make and use the medicine for a greater purpose, which will come to be complete one day. The pyramid also looks very much like the one we've seen in the episode 1 finale cutscene, and is what the entire ship looks like. This Lorbit is grey, by the way, and I also just realized I will probably have to be specifying from now on what variant each Lorbit is, which I'm sure will not make the script flow even worse than it already does. Moving onwards, I want to restate how similar the aesthetic feels to the Rust Organs. The color palette and lighting is different, but the winding corridors and haphazard placement of rooms and objects is very much familiar. In this place, we see the Malekith and growth monsters fighting side by side for the first time. A green Lorbit on this clinker cage reads, "The beasts ignore the ship's masters entirely. Programmed to harvest human life for their hive mind, they remain utterly blind to the others." Not much to add here, so let's move on to another growth-infested zone. The force fields overlook a hall with this heart-looking organ of sorts. Healer remarks, "His presence seems to be revitalizing and animating the growth beyond their control. Is this the core of the pyramid?" Wherever we are not actually inside the pyramid from which medicine seeps, so I believe this heart is a core part of the entire ship's growth-related systems. Dropping down into this hall, it is guarded by pustules and sycophants, which at first glance didn't really make sense as to how they would be here. Remember, they are normal humans with growth-born equipment. But then I realized maybe this isn't that far-fetched. A human did make it almost all the way to the pipe we entered the ship through. Maybe they were also a would-be sycophant? Defeating this not very imposing defense force and cutting open the organ spills out a huge amount of blood or some other growth-adjacent substance before opening the gates and letting us proceed down another tract for material transport. Swimming through all this liquid spilling out from the heart, some bars are all that separates us from this huge aquatic creature, making its way through the pipes. The way up opens back to the concentrator hall, and now we can access the self-destruct trigger for this unholy machine. I should probably stay away from it, the game tells us, before the pyramid explodes like an actual nuke. We must now swim down the very same path taken by the fish monster to finish this level. As you have probably deduced, the next level is a boss fight, the Death Rot Child. A new unexpected presence has revealed itself to me, a distant and weak voice, speaking through my new body. Healer, it called me, the key wielder. I felt it guiding me to sabotage this Malekith's precious medicine machine. I now find myself in a desolate part of the ship, abandoned to the wildly spreading growth. It seems they don't have much control over it anymore. Something stalks me in these depths now. Depths. How depths.
Depths.
How did they say it so casually? I cannot. Depths. I don't know if that's good. Fuck it. Depths. Something stalks me in these depths now, and I doubt it will let me pass through peacefully. The most interesting information from this description is that we are being subtly manipulated and controlled by another character. This level consists of us traversing further parts of what seems like a system used for the transportation of fluids, maybe a sewer. Making our way to the platform on the top, the blood starts boiling, and the death-wrought child emerges to fight us. These statues seem to depict Malekith bringing something to the matriarch, symbolically of course. The fish periodically emerges from the depths, and showers us with similar projectiles to that of the pustules. There is very little room to maneuver, so the fight is challenging indeed. When the health bar reaches 0, the monster flees. The blood stops boiling, and the platforms crumble. We must now face the creature in its natural habitat, and we are now the fish out of water. Or, I suppose, the human in the water? The new aquatic mines and lasers spewed out are tough to negotiate, but when we deplete the health again, the child emits a cloud of ink to disorient us and breaks through some pipes to escape. To end the level, we must follow it through. The monster is not dead, and there is no way to properly kill it, as far as I'm aware. Can you believe we're only about halfway through the episode? The winding tracts of filth spit us out in transitory termination. The pitiable creature cries as it scurries away. So be it. My journey continues on its tracks. A wall of suffocating heat hits me as I exit out of the sewers into a factory engulfed in ash and fire. Below, they burn the bodies of their own kind, while a great machine above is being fed more and more of their precious growth. The entire level is largely a mirror of the rust organs set on the ship itself. Nothing can go to waste. The growth production is augmented by the Malekith's biomass as well. Near the start, there is a secret down another sewer of growth where a group of incompatible are stuck in what appears to be a chunk of the old cult grounds, torn out from its original context. I don't see how else these terrestrial graves could have gotten here. Unlocking our way into the industrial facility of cinders and death, we are first confronted by a sentinel, the same enemy that stopped us back in episode 1 from killing the throne. It's one of my favorite fights in the game, mostly because the music goes absolutely bananas here, and the way this mini-boss moves and animates feels appropriately chaotic and fast. If I had a nickel for every banger mini-boss that's a chunky unholy paladin wielding a big bell as both a hammer and a casting tool, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. A new mechanic is introduced here. We can use the spear saw's primary attack to parry the bell swings, leaving the sentinel stunned for a brief moment. It's nowhere near necessary to beat this fight, but it feels as natural as it is satisfying. This leaves us with the uncomfortable question of why weren't we able to defeat them back in episode 1? And the answer is... Oh look Kitty, oh my god, hi! Death is considered unnatural and a flaw to the Malekith. The Sentinel were created to forever guard their mechanical catacombs, to keep their deceased safe so they may one day be brought back to life. This was one of the many promises of their mother god. None will be left behind. They would always find a way to defeat death itself. The Sentinel wield an unnatural power, which reacts to the resonance of their great bell. It paralyzes growth, so that their dead may never sprout its flowers and pollen. Without their bells, the copious amounts of growth, which the Malekith imbibe daily, would surely awaken and go wild. On their backs they carry long ribbons of brittle papers filled with names of all those who had fallen and could never be brought back to life, to memorize them and to remind the Sentinel of their duty. It is now clear how the Sentinel incapacitated Healer in that cutscene. The bell's magic has a paralyzing effect on growth, which the protagonist harbors. And further still, the flurries of magic attacks being spat out by this enemy do slow us down during the fight, if we get hit. Despite this, the power seems not entirely effective now, as both the ship and the flock are being ravaged by growth. Maybe this is somehow connected to the death of the old mind. Leaving this furnace, we enter the technological hell proper and receive another telepathic message. Above you, there, her obscured new form. Soon fully rebranded, she shall carry a key too. I cannot influence it any longer. The she is the matriarch, and she is being funneled all of the ship's medicine production capacity for the purpose of rebranding. The voice tells us she is going to have a key as well, almost as if we were in possession of such a key ourselves, and as if that was a defining feature of a rebranded being. What this key is, we shall find out quite soon. A lot of the level blends together in my mind, as it's another winding machine grinder of industrial devices, toiling away in some mysterious way. This is because its purpose is quite similar to that of the rust organs. It's strewn with Malekith corpses of the natural and growth-afflicted kind, and even liquefying in these vats. This certainly doesn't seem like the mechanical catacombs they were promised. In 2 spots, we can actually hear furious roars and bangs, probably coming from the matriarch. Passing through some kind of infirmary, the bodies are being absorbed by growth, and a grey lorbit on one of the spires reads, "The Malnecris now blooms unchecked, their bodies unable to contain it. The throne used last of its powers to aid so many, and to rebrand you." Given this direct address to Healer, I think it is safe to say this particular variant of lorbit represents a message from the same character, communicating telepathically with us. Because who else could it be? The color of the text is subtly different to the green ones, and it matches with the scripted messages we get. That being said, I have no fucking clue what the voice is talking about when they said the throne aided so many. We pass through some sanctimonious looking vestibules to arrive at the rebranding chamber. Terminals identical to the ones in structures of growth, such as the rust organs, are legible to Healer and read Malnecris or growth, concentrated and funneled into a recipient. Process has taken 6 months. Rebranding status, success. A combination code of very poor security brings out the pod. It did not escape me that these yellow effects are the same as those on the burning body from E1M2. I therefore postulate that they represent an attractive force of growth, used to move things or minds alike. Opening the pod reveals her, a grotesque yet powerful creature. She grows the blade, in a manner reflecting what we saw in the intro cutscene. Looking back at it now, it is easy to recognize scenes from the Malekith ship, and these visions of the matriarch statues as well, as rebranding. Since the blade only appeared in front of our eyes, we can infer that was a mere premonition. She lashes out in hatred, and the automatic alarm detects damage to the systems and brings her away. We are left flooded with a response force, but we cut through it all the same, as we have done so far, and we get another message. She now wields it, the key. Now she, too, seeks the throne. Come to me, seek me, Healer. It is clear, a defining feature of rebranded beings is the bone blades they grow, which is also a special key for something. The matriarch is now on her way to the throne, somewhere on the ship, and we must pursue her, onwards to the ruptured idol. As I enter this section of the vessel, I am suddenly hit by a wall of unseen power. A disturbing yet nostalgic feeling racks my body. The same indescribable crushing presence that we all felt down in those ruins 6 months ago. The grafting throne is here, very close. The blade in my hand resonates with its presence and pulls me forward. Their mother god seeks the same thing as I. Then we shall meet at the throne's chamber. This level has us follow in the matriarch's footsteps towards the throne. The locations here are less brutalist and almost feel like parts of a spaceship built by humans. In the start, we enter a small R&D facility in which we find this final weapon of the game. The Omen Strike looks very much like a demonic version of the Gauss cannon from Doom 4 and functions similarly too. The orange energy unmistakably portrays it as a growth-born instrument. You can also find it in a secret in the previous level, but I skipped it because it makes more sense to be here. We must follow the rail systems taken by the Mother God to get to the throne room. A lot of the level feels like nothing we haven't seen before, but there are a few points of interest. Here is the location where the pod ended up, and the green Lorbit on this panel says, the Matriarch's transit ended up here. She is being led through her quarters to the chamber of the throne. Further along, we find what seems to be a bridge for the entire ship, with a schematic of the vessel. This seems to be projecting the ship's schematics. If the bottom is the vivarium, it seems that this place was designed solely for harvesting growth. Indeed, the spherical shape is definitely part of what was transported for consumption. There's also 3 TV panels showing locations from the vivarium and the Grey Lorbit. The harvesting grounds, now a grave for many lost worlds. For such heavy costs, she promised them unification, love, the throne itself. We eventually find the switch to unlocking the throne room, but that's only part of the puzzle. We must descend down into this maintenance section to progress further. The Matriarch's throne room is grand and epic, but with a rotting secret. The Death Child has made its way here and now lies decapitated, with huge scratch marks on the floor. 2 Lorbits here. He was to be just like you, a blade wielder, next in line, ascension through blood. Wollard. Bro, did I write this? This is exactly how I would say it. Wollard devouring to become what I am, a dweller of the throne. Her son was first to be rebranded, the key just in his reach, God in making. He surpassed her, and so sparked deep jealousy. He was abandoned, never to be seen by their kin again. Okay, that's a lot. Let's try to wrap our heads around this. First of all, the revelation that the voice speaking to us is a rebranded being too. And they also call themselves a dweller of the throne. It would appear the key of rebranded beings allows them to access something inside of the grafting throne. Let's now come back to the bestiary description for the Death Child to learn more about them. The Matriarch was obsessed with the process of rebranding by combining fresh and purified growth, or malnecris as they call it. With a young and healthy specimen, they may create a so-called key wielder. All rebranded grow a blade, and the blade is a key to the world within the grafting throne. Rebranded, first of a new species, may then take the true throne within its world to control the grafting throne and create life as mortal gods. The Death Child was the only biological child of Matriarch. He was exposed to experimental and extreme forms of technological rebranding at young age, but as the child rapidly matured into a perfect rebranded creature and sprouted the blade, she felt immense jealousy and cast the child into the ship's labyrinthian sewer system, never to see his kin again. She now knew that the process would work and took his place in the rebranding. The child's form resembles that of Kitty's species, an echo deep from the growth and the countless species which were devoured for their greed. This is quite self-explanatory and tells us completely new information about the nature of the throne. It is possible for rebranded beings to enter inside and then control it. If we go all the way back to the description of the healer, it is now clear someone was controlling the throne when the protagonist got rebranded, given the voice seemed pleased to see us arrive at the ship, and also how it was subtly controlling us all this time. I would speculate it is that character, whoever this belongs to. As far as that last paragraph, I should refer all the way back to the pustule's description. It made reference to how the form of that being is reminiscent of some humanoid, yet not human creature. I inferred from this that this creature was the flock, because what other humanoid yet non-human thing could it have been? However, upon further reflection, they look absolutely nothing alike. The closest thing I can think of that looks kind of similar is the feral armament. They both have underdeveloped or crippled lower bodies and use their arms for stabilization and orientation. However, this is probably not what was referred to. The boss is clearly based on a human, so if the pustule is based on the feral armament, that still means its form comes from humans. When I was fighting the Deathroot child, I noticed how the projectile attacks are the same as those of the pustules, but the organism doesn't look very similar either. However, its description kicked open the door to speculation of what other possible worlds the Malekith could have consumed, and the biological templates growth has absorbed. Therefore, my best guess as to what the pustule is supposed to look like is some unknown humanoid alien species previously harvested. As for the creature in this room, I cannot tell you why it decided to come here. However, I can tell you that the reason it's dead is because the matriarch is seeking to enter the grafting throne and eliminate all beings that could possibly compete for the power she lost. She's so close to achieving her goal, after all. Now feels as good a time as any to read her bestiary description. An immeasurably old queen of the Malekith and godmother of their cosmic fleet, it was her plan to plant the grafting throne into inhabited planets to turn its people into growth. By harvesting the growth and purifying it, the Malekith can create near-endless stockpiles of their medicine, which ensures that none of them may die from old age nor sickness. Yet most of it was given directly to Matriarch and her daughters, subjects modified to mirror her beauty and wisdom. I believe those are the cherished. Presenting herself as a benevolent leader, she got her people to join her crusade against mortality, but over the centuries, all have come to know her true face. The medicine was simply a thing to make them follow her, to be dependent on her. She was eventually rebranded, like her son, and it was only a matter of luck that the guardian of the grafting throne on Earth was dispatched by the healer. With the grafting throne and her newly sprouted blade, she had also become the key wielder, and sought to replace her ancestor within its world and become a mortal god herself. Nothing we haven't really seen so far, but there is something pissing me off here. This description makes it seem like the Firstborn was this insurmountable obstacle for the Malekith, which Healer managed to destroy for them. However, the description of the Firstborn itself kind of goes back and forth on whether the existence of this creature was foreseen by the Malekith or not. This seems contradictory, as how would they be able to plan its death if it's such a big problem? Anyway, the way to the throne's chamber has been sealed, and some kind of artifact is required to unlock it. We must make our way through some communal living spaces of the space demons, such as a cantina. You can interact with the switch to dispose some growth food, and one neat little detail here is that pressing it again spills out the excess growth, which prompts a sympath to come clean it up, because that's their entire purpose. We even find a sort of hot tub room and pick up a half-grown throne finger. For whatever reason, this specifically is what unlocks the way forward. I wonder if it's part of the Deathroot child that was removed during the rebranding, but it could be anything. In the same room, a computer panel lets us read some more information. Excerpt from her log. This world has brought ample harvest. The rebranding was a success. Finally, to be able to rebuild it all, perfected, controlled, all in one flesh. No cost is too high. Clearly, this log was made moments before our arrival here, and the key to progress was probably carried by the flock to lock the path behind her. As we descend in pursuit of the matriarch, we see camera footage of her using the blade to slice open a rift in space. We see the throne is here, and she's about to enter inside. She thinks she has won, but you are stronger than her. Go on, healer, make your incision. Finally, using the blade for its intended purpose, we enter the now ruptured idol of worship and power, and what awaits ahead, only God knows. I know we've gone over a lot in the past few levels, and we still have another lot coming up. If you're losing track of what is happening, I will make sure to recap everything once we have all the information. The next level lacks a display name and description. All we get is this image of healer enveloped in a white light, similar to that radiating out of his eyes. If we toggle the stats, we see it's internally just called Unknown. We start off in a cave, touched in places by growth, and soon witness hordes of these frail beings running at us and exploding if they get too close or upon death. Emerging outside, we view the true face of the throne's pocket dimension, a shattered world of ancient-looking ruins floating above an ocean of what could be malnecris or blood. One of the first things I noticed this time is these very spires that I'm so glad I brought attention to back in the previous video. They're made of a different material, but the shape is undeniably identical. I still don't think they represent anything particular, but they're not the only thing that will look very familiar. In fact, we also see very human gravestones, along with these sarcophagi, which should ring bells in how they're placed sometimes. And, of course, we still have growth monsters to fight. Monsters such as conservators, which were imitations of the cult's robes. To me, these observations mean that the flow of information between the world outside and inside isn't as restricted as the transfer of living beings. It seems that the growth knows what is happening with the growth outside of the throne, and vice versa. We will even have to be fighting all kinds of Malekith, and all of these enemies spawn with this red thunder. I only have speculation as to what this represents. It could be the throne manifesting valiant life forms as a defense mechanism, or it could be them somehow following us in pursuit, even though they're not rebranded. Honestly, I'm probably not meant to be looking this deep into it. This is meant to be just a fun level in a unique setting. Besides the small explodey enemies, we will also face bigger variants, hurling explosive clots of filth at us. The game calls them Ancient Ones. They have the same model, and the bestiary doesn't differentiate between the two, but let's come back to that later. As we penetrate the caves and the ruins, we reach these two circular structures. The second one harbors more growth than we've seen earlier in the level, along with these sarcophagi sticking out of the walls. At the top is the portal to the true throne. With another wormhole effect, we have reached the matriarch. Witnessing all of this has only strengthened my sense of self, my purpose. This is what I was made for, rebranded for. The mission I was imprinted with was a faint plea for death. I can only trust that I had been set on the right path. The growth still remains, even if the Malekith and the throne are gone. The matriarch is here, the last obstacle between me and the throne. She's blind to her imperfection. She too will die, as will the throne. We enter into a thick mist, only able to follow footsteps. We come across the remains of another gigantic creature sliced in half, before finding the other part. It's a huge Malekith, and they're not dead. They raise their head and speak to us. She shackled me, rejecting the throne's true purpose. Without me, and without you, the throne now accepts her. I made you to kill her, to kill me, my healer. So, please, take, giving us an extra life. All I can do now, not a god, merely a pilot, as those before me. We can choose to kill them or not, but it doesn't affect anything beyond this additional dialogue if we do. Thank you. What comes after is up to you. This creature is called the Pilot in the bestiary, and even there it is split apart. The description reads: First of the Malekith, result of a rebranding by its predecessors, proven by the blade on his palm. No records of his life before becoming the mortal god. A pilot of the grafting throne exists anywhere. The matriarch made sure nobody would remember him. Enduring centuries of misuse, he finally found a perfect specimen on Earth, and so he rebranded a single human for the sole purpose of destroying the grafting throne and himself to put an end to the Malicant's greed. The matriarch had not foreseen that a being as lowly as human would raise to oppose her will, but the healer was not a human anymore. All life forms which undergo the rebranding process are first of their kind, stronger than those who came before them. The grafting throne doesn't seem to have much of a will of its own. Instead, it is being piloted by a rebranded being. This pilot insists they aren't gods, but bestiary descriptions do call them mortal gods. I interpret this to mean that they aren't truly divine beings, more like mere organisms with great power at their fingertips. The pilot was in control of the throne for all the events in the game, and the first of their kind. This means the throne was previously owned and controlled by a yet another faction before the Malicant. Pilot saw the Malicant's exploitation as evil and chose to end the cycle of growing and harvesting Malnekris by choosing one human, the protagonist, and rebranded them along with giving them a goal. Just like the Firstborn's mission was to protect the throne, it was healers to destroy it. This seems contradictory, but the pilots needed the Malicant to not come down and retrieve the throne until healer had arrived. Let's now go back to the very first description I brought up while discussing the game, and read it in full. That's healers, of course. Military scientist, former archaeologist, and war veteran, loner, enjoyer of guns, and a man of bad temper. He was called to examine the newly found ruins of the old cult underneath her home city, with a small team of various famous experts on the matter. For reasons unknown to all, the grafting throne, and who resided within it, used his body in the process of rebranding to create a superhuman killing machine for one purpose: to destroy the grafting throne. A blade grew out from the bone of his forearm, an object of mystery and obsession. An unbending will to finish this mission was implanted into his subconscious. He spent 6 months studying the monsters and learning everything he can about the growth and the cult, and eventually set off to fulfill his mission, telling himself it was simply for the good of humanity. His new form was twisted yet sturdy, disgusting yet perfect for his mission. He would never tire, never feel fear, hunger, nor thirst, and he was allowed to keep his mind and memories to use as fuel for his campaign. An otherworldly energy enveloped his internal structure, glowing out of his eyes, a pale light echoing that which made him. Healer's mission, that he talks of in loading screens and lore bits, was to destroy the grafting throne, but that was not born of his will. It was a literal mission given to him. This is why, as the target was whisked away, a wish for death filled his mind, and the instruction is represented in the first place by the words "kill me" in the opening cutscene. If we go back to one of the messages from Growth in E2M2, they say, "You carry our mantle," as it was intended. It was the pilot's intention, or, more generally, the intention to supplant the mortal gods with newer, more powerful beings. If you've played Doom Eternal, the story of the matriarch and the flock in general reflects the story of Urdak and the Khan Maker. She was also a ruler of her race, part of a natural cycle of creating new queens to replace old ones. She halted this cycle, and death itself, for herself and the minions, thanks to Argent Energy, a product in the creation of which consumption of worlds by Hell was necessary, including Earth. In this game, we find another, even bigger maker body in a pool of liquid, which was probably supposed to be the next Khan, now frozen in stasis and eternal obsolescence, and the lesser makers bound to her will with a hive mind. This is a long shot, but when I saw the giant hand in the waste pool, my mind immediately went straight to this dormant Khan, and given how prevalently it is mentioned that the matriarch loves rewriting history for her benefit, I wonder if this is the body of another would-be mortal god who harbored aspirations of the throne, who was slain and disposed of here. The only Malicant beings who match its size have been rebranded. This theory doesn't have much supporting evidence in the game, but it's the best I've got. Right, I know this is a lot to get through. This episode of Incision is a fucking doozy. This is what I meant when I said it's lore heavy. I'm sure I've lost many of you by now, but hang in there, soldier. We only have 2 descriptions and 1 cutscene to get through, before I present the more digestible recap of everything. Digestible for you. It's not going to be digestible for me, because I'm the one who has to fucking write it. Let's now get to the description of the grafting throne itself. An artifact of unknown origin, possibly from times beyond any cosmic record. Originally, a simple tool to implant life with Malnekris, to grant it rapid evolution, or to break down life and create new species from their remains. Within the grafting throne is a world coursing through its veins, formed by its thunderous energy, a sort of projection of a small parallel universe which is and isn't around it all the time. Within the world sits the true throne, an obelisk slab which gives a rebranded being full access to its mechanisms, directly connecting the grafting throne and its new mortal god to the Sea of Malnekris, an ocean of primordial life. The Malekith had no interest in true worship of a deity. The matriarch saw in their own representative mortal god nothing but a tool to be exploited. The throne was enslaved, for the sole purpose of generating more Malnekris, growth, to fulfill her greed, and became a parasite god which devoured all the worlds the Malekith saw fit for harvesting. The extreme misuse of the grafting throne eventually spawned a crack from which the Malnekris would slowly seep out of, and the faith-blinded religious sect became nothing but a death cult, feeding their crimson god, believing the grafting throne and the growth to be one and the same. A lot of this is things we already know, but this description makes it very clear that growth and the throne are 2 separate things. Growth is more like the medium by which the throne fulfills its purpose, which isn't death and destruction, but creation of life in a controlled manner. Malnekris exists in the throne, but what the growth does once it's outside is largely out of its control. The fact that it was seeping out of the artifact only after extensive misuse, or, dare I say, abuse, means this isn't the natural modus operandi. Instead, the description suggests that the normal method of implant life with Malnekris is more subtle. Perhaps Healer's rebranding is what it resembles. Anyway, we soon fall through a hole in the ground and drop onto the arena where we fight the matriarch. This arena gives us a significant boost to the recharge of the Spear Saw's special attack. And I get why. The game wants you to have this rebranded on rebranded, blade on blade battle, where your Spear Saw is an extension of you for both parrying and punishing openings. The boss is able to summon phantom projections of herself, possibly resulting from her new control over the growth. However, she, like all before her, falls to Healer's persistence and determination. Behind the arena, we can see what is probably the true throne mentioned in the description, the real seat of power, and the ocean of red below us is probably the Malnekris under its control. When the boss dies, the final cutscene immediately starts. One of the most brutal and gory executions on our foe immediately results in the throne shattering and all the growth spilling out. It fills up the whole ship, before it too explodes, and unfortunately blanketing the city again with filth and decay. And that's the end of episode 2. I will now go over some loose bits I haven't brought up yet, before wrapping up everything together into a cohesive whole. Let's start with the description of the Ancient Ones. Within the otherworld of the grafting throne lies countless graves of ancient mortal gods. Despite the godlike powers one wields as the master of the throne, all will eventually fall victim to time itself. When the growth saw its opportunity to escape through the cracks between the worlds, it weaponized the decaying bodies and filled them with hatred and volatile energy. Their shambling bodies are sturdy and hideous and all share a humanoid form, implying that they are all from the same line of evolution, creations of rebranded beings who eventually replaced their creator. Okay, I know many of you watching probably aren't really following anymore, but as I'm sitting here writing the script, I myself am struggling to wrap my head around what is happening in this description. Let's start with the easy part. These beings are not malcontent. Probably. They have 2 eye sockets and do look like they could have been human, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are. Secondly, each of them was a mortal god, meaning they were at some point in control of the throne. Third of all, the crack through which growth escapes is probably the crack in the grafted throne. But what about the second paragraph? It says the shared trait of being humanoid is enough to conclude that they share the same evolutionary lineage. Okay. They have the exact same models, so I already concluded that the moment I saw them. Unless they're saying these beings were humans? I don't think this makes sense. The final sentence says that creations of rebranded beings replace their creator, and unfortunately it is very unspecific as to who are the creations and who are the creators. If the Ancient Ones were humans, that would mean some other race of beings in possession of the throne created them, and then were replaced. The Ancient Ones then had to have the throne, and then it would somehow have to fall into the hands of the Malekith, but humans were not replaced. And sure, the cult did have the throne for some time, but it was planted there by the space demons, and there was no talk of any cultists getting rebranded. Besides, the fact that the first Malekith was the pilot up until we came here is contradictory with the fact that the reason the cult exists in the first place is because of the throne being brought down by the Malekith, so the timeline doesn't line up. If anything, it would make more sense that the Ancient Ones are spacefaring beings who created the flock instead, and were replaced by them. I don't think this is necessarily corroborated by what it says in the description, but that's the best I've got. I also wonder if this means the name Malekith comes from Malnekris, and if they are creatures of growth, that would explain why they need growth for their medicine. Okay, I know I've already brought this up before, but the pilot giving us an extra life makes the uncomfortable assertion that these are physical things in the world of Incision and not just a video game pickup. There's really not many things that have this pale green glow to them. In the other world of the throne, there are these burning vessels, and besides those, there are green accents on things like jump pads and other technological items. Remember this hole back in E2M1? It would be a huge stretch to say these lights are somehow connected to all of this, because they do just look like green lights. However, there is something about the shade that feels like it just fits well within the realm of the gods. The extra lives and the fire is a pretty strong connection in my mind. Not that it matters much. Okay, we're at the final stretch. Let's start wrapping things up now. The timeline that we know of so far looks like this. Eons ago, a race of beings somewhere in space that the game only calls Ancient Ones were in possession of the grafting throne. They might have made it, or might have not. We really don't know where it came from. The grafting throne was a tool that could manipulate life as a force using Malnekris, or growth. It could be used in careful and calculated ways to rapidly create and evolve new life forms, or break them down for further reuse. The way this would work is that the grafting throne generates an otherworld, possibly as an emergent property of the processes within. Not unlike the human consciousness itself, in order to take control of the throne, one would have to undergo rebranding. This is a process that can be performed by the throne itself, and causes individuals to grow a bone blade, which is the key for this creature to enter the pocket dimension. Inside, they will find the proper throne and the controls within for it. This doesn't make them immortal, and all of such beings will end up in the ground with time. The amount of pilots who are in control of the throne might be very high, but we know nothing about them. The Ancient Ones probably created the Malekith using this method, and the first of them was rebranded to become the new pilot. The Malekith eventually replaced the Ancient Ones, whether that be by conquest or thanks to now wielding the power of the throne. Either way, they have built a society of order and obedience to the matriarch. She told them death was a shortcoming, which could be eliminated. By planting the grafting throne on inhabited worlds, it would cause growth to spread and consume biomatter to all become one. When this growth died, it could be harvested, and life-prolonging medicine could be manufactured. And so they built harvest vessels to send into deep space for this purpose. They became entirely dependent on growth and used its imitative properties for construction of their very ships, and probably many more things. However, the real reason the matriarch wanted the medicine was to undergo rebranding herself. She discovered this process could be performed artificially too, but would require copious amounts of growth. For the purposes of experimentation, her son was the first to be rebranded using this prototype technology. He grew a blade, as expected, and transformed into this aquatic creature, similar in shape and anatomy to Kitty, possibly a reused template from some distant race of beings consumed by growth. A jealousy grew within the matriarch, for she wanted to be rebranded too, and cast him into the sewer bowels of the ship, never to be seen again. Earth was next to be assimilated, and the Malicant planted the throne, while forming a cult around it, untold centuries ago. The pilot, despite being in control of the throne, was still somehow under the oppression of the matriarch, and he recognized the evil behind the flock's machinations. He hatched a plan to strike back at the Mother God and end the brutal cycle of death and consumption. A crack formed in the throne, from which growth seeped, due to the misuse and abuse of the former tool, now a cog in the machine. The growth was not under the direct control of the pilot, but he managed to create what would be a throne's firstborn. As far as the cultists were concerned, this being would grow stronger to protect itself from the Malicant coming back for it. Why did he need the throne to stay where it was? Because after the cult dissolved and was buried, archaeologists in modern times uncovered the ruins and the throne. This awakened the machine to get to consumption, but the pilot chose the protagonist of the game to be rebranded. They would turn into a first of their kind, with the mission to kill the matriarch, the grafting throne, and the pilot. Why did Healer not destroy the throne there and then? I think the manipulator wanted the protagonist to destroy the whole machine, not just a crucial piece of it. For that, they would have to be relocated to a safer place, where they could study the growth which has now taken over the entire city. This is around the time that the matriarch entered the pod to start the rebranding process herself. 6 months later, Healer is beckoned to go back and fulfill his mission. The events of episode 1 happen. He kills the firstborn for the sake of destroying the throne, but the Malicant were faster. They stop the protagonist before transporting a chunk of the city and the throne to their vessel. The death of the firstborn, also the growth's hive mind, emits a signal which liquefies the growth. This new form has blood siphoning properties for the purpose of forming a new hive mind. This also makes the substance fit for harvest, and it's what the Malicant have gotten to doing, from the vivarium using great pipes. This is where the first 2 levels of episode 2 take place, in the crumbling ruins of the city being drained dry. We see 2 red lorbits, which represent the growth's attempts at communication with Healer, but they don't really say anything all that interesting that we aren't about to find out for ourselves. He also observes the growth monsters have a new goal, and that is probably his elimination, or just a general defense of the ship from intruders. In level 3, we manage to board the ship proper and start getting telepathic messages from the pilot. He guides us through the vessel, making us sabotage the medicine production facility. We will have to get through the Death Rothschild to progress, and we are victorious, the beast left fleeing for its life. It is obvious, the ship is on the verge of collapse, as the growth it is made of is going wild and spawning its filthy soldiers. This is also the case for the medicine inside of the Malicant's bodies. The pilot leaves us more messages in the form of these grey lorbits for us to learn more about his kind, and one of them mentions the death of something called an old mind as the cause of this chaos. It's not impossible that it was the firstborn, because it was the only thing this could be that we know of, but that would make the timeline very messy, and I therefore doubt it is the case. As we get through and out of a Rust Organ style facility, for the processing of their own dead, we reach the matriarch herself. She's being rebranded as we watch, and then taken to the throne. We must pursue her, lest she become the new mortal god. She kills her child to eliminate any possible competition, and enters the throne, with us just behind. Fighting our way through the other world, we eventually reach the evil and would-be goddess, to face her and destroy the throne once and for all. This causes all of the growth to come spilling out before destroying the vessel and leaving the ocean of filth on top of the city. This feels like it could be a conclusion to the story, as we're left with no intelligent antagonists, but there's still episode 3 to go over, and we're going to witness things not meant for human eyes. Thanks for watching. And by the way, if you're wondering why Pilot didn't destroy the throne himself, oh my god, Kitty, hi! The final episode of Incision is the shortest, simplest, and yet most confusing and cryptic of the lot. While the first two have 6 levels and 2 boss fights, this one only has 3 and 2 respectively. The throne and the matriarch are gone, and now all that remains is an all-destructive and all-consuming evil, turbocharged by the power of the Chariot of the Gods. The game takes a dark turn in the start, and charts a completely unique course to the one so far. As usual, I wanted to quickly mention that Ini has left another comment on the previous video, giving a full transcript of the radio message, which I didn't provide, since I didn't quite catch all of it myself. Let's now get into the finale of the darkest boomer shooter yet, where everything falls apart. The cutscene starts in a haze yet again. Healer is alive, but barely conscious. He has been found by a sycophant and conservator. By the bone blade on the spear saw, they seem to recognize him. Something explodes in the background before the protagonist is taken to this diabolical machine. It carelessly slices them open and pulls out this otherworldly object, glistening with red energy. We are dragged and dropped into a furnace pit, still bleeding, and E3M1 begins, Thy Cherished Flesh. My new body shivers for the first time in 6 months. I know what they did to me, took from me, my power, the gift of the grafting throne which made me stronger than any of its spawn, was stolen. Emotions that I had nearly forgotten are coming back to me. I mustn't let them overwhelm me. They can't be allowed to harness such power. I'll follow its trail to the core of the growth and leave it a permanent mark of fear. Within the narrative of the game, the process of rebranding built this organ within Healer, which gave them the powers they had. While their physical form remains the same, they are now slowly becoming human again, with emotions and vulnerabilities to match. All that being said, nothing changes within the gameplay. The player still moves and fights in exactly the same way as before, which creates some ludonarrative dissonance, and makes it hard to ascertain exactly what has changed. By the way, the phrase, Thy Cherished Flesh, sounds like it's a line from somewhere, and I looked it up, but most of the results are related to Incision. So I guess if this is a reference to something, it must be really obscure, but probably not. I guess it just reminded me of Thy Flesh Consumed episode from Doom, which is a line from the Bible. The level begins in said furnace pit. We must shoot and destroy these 2 glowy bits, which damages the contraption and gets us up. We see that we are in a growth-born structure again, similar to, if not the Rust Organs. One of the screens reads, The growth's language is barely comprehensible. The word Primagen is used many times in relation to my DNA. I looked up if the word Primagen meant anything, and it doesn't seem to be an actual word beyond... Oh my god. Regardless of its real meaning, I think it's safe to say this information is very important to growth, and they have already harvested a great amount by analysis of the core extracted from Healer's body. To get out of this room, we must press 4 switches before being attacked by a response force of Rustborn, followed by a single sycophant, sparkling with orange energy, and getting fucking destroyed. Wait, that wasn't supposed to happen. There are only 2 new enemy types in this whole episode. Instead, the rest of the increase in stakes and difficulty comes from these new variants of existing kinds. Particular enemies will be imbued with the same orange energy we've been seeing everywhere, and have enhanced capabilities. They have higher health, tend to be faster, and have alternate attack methods. The Sycophant fires 3 blades instead of just 1. The Clinkers fire out these slow homing projectiles. I have 2 theories as to what they represent, and I go back and forth on which one I find more convincing. Let me first get a few things clear off the bat, because they help contextualize many events in this episode. There's 3 major changes between episodes 2 and 3. First of all, growth is now under the control of nothing and no one, serving only its own greed and glutton. Second of all, the power of the throne didn't just disappear when it was destroyed, but instead rained down, along with the filth, and is now being tamed by the Malnecris. Third of all, growth has recovered the core of Healer, not only a source of great strength, but also data and knowledge. It's been studying him all the way back, even in episode 1 after all. I say this because I believe the orange enemy variants could be the result of different things. My first hypothesis is that they are now simply harboring the throne's power, granted by a miracle in the sky. The other theory involves the Spearsaw Overcharge power-up. Remember how I was saying we'd come back to it later? Well, when I saw the empowered Sycophant, my first thought was, oh damn, this looks so similar to that one power-up that we've been using, but seemed useless for growth itself. Especially given that we've just been captured and essentially interrogated. I felt like the forces of evil have finally understood how to harness some of Healer's capabilities and turn them against him. I feel like this cutscene, text prelude, and start of the level are designed in a way to draw this connection in your head, and also I find it a bit more narratively satisfying. The first sections of the level don't really hold anything we haven't seen before in similar levels, except for the fact that the facility is not in good shape. There's debris and fire scattered in places, and everything shakes and rumbles at a few points in the level, as if airstrikes or artillery were being used up above. In this shipping area quite reminiscent of the start of E1M5, we are faced by one of the 2 new enemy types of the episode, a behemoth. An absolute titan of military armaments, bulletproof plating, and a structure resembling a centipede. Growth's ways of understanding life and remixing its blueprint for its creations never fails to amaze. It wields a heavy caliber machine gun, a mini rocket launcher, and a cluster grenade launcher, and it simply will not stop until its core is destroyed. The eyeless face still seems to look around, as if searching for threats to its territory. Growth seems to give its monsters behaviors of other creatures, without any other purpose than mimicry. This is probably the toughest non-boss enemy type in this game, and they require hails upon hails of sustained fire to be brought down. This description also mentions mimicry, and that's probably for good reason. This is not new information. We already know growth imitates materials for its structures, weapons for their soldiers, and even clothing. That being said, this theme will be especially prevalent in this episode. Moving on, we come across this technological facility. There's several half-translucent torsos on coffin-like tables, and a Lorbit. Their bodies aren't fully tangible, and their faces are missing. What were they doing here? They seem to express some form of emotion too. You won't believe this, but we will have to come back to them later, when this will make much more sense. Further along, the rust organs actually give way to the more human environment of a small part of an apartment complex. I'm not really sure whether this is an actual building being consumed by growth, or if it is an imitation. However, the smooth transitions from the industrial building into the complex and then back into the rust organs make me think it's the latter. There's one Easter egg here, probably a reference to something flying over my head right now. This room is the smooth transition I was speaking of, by the way. It looks like it's just as much part of the rust organs as anything else. We also fight a single ancient one here, and it feels a bit out of place, doesn't it? This will also be a theme in this episode. Everything that created growth and everything that growth created is falling apart and blending together into some unknown project of absolute chaos. Stepping through this gate, we finally see a good omen, jets flying overhead, bombing a structure of growth. Only took them 6 months to arrive, no biggie. The rest of the level takes place in these strange trenches, and 2 more times we see explosions, one of them right on a nest of tough enemies. Another tube of flesh leads us to the exit. The next level is Rustborn Messiah. The wound in me bleeds, and I am beginning to feel pain again, a hollow coldness radiating from my chest all around my body. I am losing my power. As long as my legs continue to carry me and I can still aim, I must keep moving without pause. Someone is stalking me in the haze of this desolate factory. Its movement is weightless, soundless, too perfect. We are in the rust organs again, starting on top of a pile of corpses, some of which being sympaths. It's as if we've traversed a now defunct tract for waste transport. Dropping down into this arena, we are soon faced with the first boss fight of the episode. The battle has us fight against 3 Rustborn Messiah enemies, back to back to back, wielding a quad shotgun, rocket launcher and minigun respectively. When it comes to the first and third, range is your best friend. It is the second one that's the hardest in my opinion. His rocket launcher has great homing, for whatever reason, and deals tremendous damage. The first 2 disappear into a haze of orange energy, further connecting healer to the new empowered variants. The last, however, drops to their knees, pulls out a revolver, and blows their brains out, or whatever it is they've got in there. These foes are replicas of healer, and their description reads: Growth's addled ways of recreating life was effective, yet simple, too simple for its own sake. On the outside, the Rustborn Messiah is a perfect copy of the healer, down to the minute details of his deformed body and ragged and repurposed hazmat suit. As the creature had decided to self-terminate by his own free will, its demise left the healer a terrifying feeling which he could not get out of his mind. Free will. It was as if behind that mask was also a sentience, a person, another him, confused and conflicted. Growth has been able to create proper minds, the throne's firstborn being one example. However, this took a huge amount of time and biomatter. The vast majority of the hellish legions were controlled by some kind of hive mind instead. Now, armed with a treasure trove of data, from the one thing it could not stop, growth is capable of creating true sentience, these 3 specimen being early but potent attempts. Okay, let's get to Oblivion Threshold. This is the big one. This is the level when I realized the story wasn't going to come together on its own, and will require some really deep digging to figure it all out. Growth only seeks to devour, to learn and to grow stronger. It was obvious that it would eventually begin to copy the one thing it cannot kill, but an imitation remains an imitation. Traveling through the ruins, I find another underground fortress of theirs. An eerie bell echoes in the distance, and both the Growth and the Malicant have gathered here. Their wrath for me must not be underestimated. This will not be easy. This level takes place in a gaping cavern of flesh, not unlike the Filth Pit, and has a similar greenish tinge. There's been a few points in this episode so far which looked deliberately reminiscent of areas from previous zones. The rust organs, the apartment complex, the pile of dead sympaths. the green haze inside a hole of growth in this level, the cultist props, and what I can only assume are the remnants of the vivarium pipes. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying that they are the same spots, but I think the game is trying to show us that we're vaguely retreading our footsteps towards some core of growth that Healer believes to exist somewhere. The first part of this level takes place in the small fortress of Rust, but our goal is the church on top of the cliff. To open the gate, we will have to cut open 2 tumors at the ends of each lane. The left path winds through piles of debris and hordes of Malekith. Ascending the edges of this ravine, we find the entrance to this chunk of their ship that has crash landed here, and a pit of bodies, seemingly a mass grave. The inside of the vessel doesn't seem all that overrun with growth, but it is filled with a lot of angry space demons. A lore bit on the screen of static reads: "The brave sentinels have gone to pass through the rift storm. They believe it will lead them to the core of the Malnekris, the growth. One stays behind to keep the rift storm stable, so we may all pass through it." This is very vague, and things will only get worse. Further inside the ship, there's more screens with 3 consecutive lore bits. The growth runs rampant. The powers freed from the throne's destruction are convening, giving birth to something new. We may never witness it. Without our medicine, we are nothing. We never saw our matriarch again. One survivor returned from the throne's realm. With her death, our hopes of survival came to an abrupt end. What she called rebranding was nothing but a mockery. And so her poor child's betrayal, her attempts at godhood, centuries of meaningless servitude, it was all for nothing. The warrior's path surely ends on an equally hollow note. The Malekith don't quite know what happened inside of the throne, but they know of our victory over the matriarch. They say one survivor returned, and that could have been us, but the way these are written almost sounds like they reported what happened to the rest of the flock. So I feel like this was some Malekith, but it's pretty open to interpretation. Now the powers of the throne are nourishing something in the heart of growth. There's a rift storm leading there, held open by one sentinel, and many of the aliens have passed through. The Malekith are now disillusioned with everything they've been doing so far. They will never return to their old ways of life again. They're stranded on Earth, and all there is to do is see what it's all building towards. If they won't have their immortality or throne, at least they will witness the final form of the thing that destroyed their dreams. One part of this text that surprised me is talk of a betrayal by the matriarch's child. I say the because there is only one, the Deathrot child. This eludes me to this day. What betrayal? The son was rebranded and then cast away. So far, there has been no talk of anything he did of his own agency. My only hypothesis for this is maybe when we find him dead in the throne room, he actually came back to seek the throne for himself. Reaching the tumor, we get a good view of how molten steel is pouring out from underneath the church, which again reminds me a lot of the filth pit. Having made the incision, more troops spawn to attack us, and now we must go down the second lane, this one a dark labyrinth of rotting filth. This is where I actually fired my 0th nuke, and now I had -1. I'm sure there's some deep lore connections there. After cutting the other tumor, we can enter this huge cavity with... Could they make my job easy for once? It's the Deathrot child, still decapitated, carrying his head, and he sure do be walking. I am afraid to say there is no more context to this, and I somehow have to make sense of it. My best guess as to why he's here is that growth is intensely experimenting with forms of powerful creatures, and we've seen that already with Healer. We know that the throne has powers of resurrection, as per episode 1, so maybe the child was brought back as another possible blueprint of a champion for the Malnekris. Only one more tumor, one more horde, and the gate opens. Some familiar props and beings, back from the cult levels in episode 1, and we enter the church before the floor crumbles underneath us. Now we are affected by the Sentinel's bell, and our movement speed is greatly reduced, while also disabling our flashlight. A ghostly silhouette approaches us, and momentarily takes physical form to strike at Healer. A single shot from the Jawbreaker is enough for it to keel over and tear off its own face, before emitting a cloud of blood-sapping substances. This enemy is called Dregs. After Healer's heart and source of his strength had been extracted, Growth began to experiment on cloning the one thing it could not outpower. Though the process of cloning is unknown, these few specimens seem to exist mostly in a near-invisible state of gases. It says gases. That's what it says in the gases, yeah. And otherworldly energy. Their forms solidify only momentarily to strike at their victim, turning invisible soon afterwards. Their body holds immense amounts of Growth's bloodletting toxins that seem to thirst only for Healer's blood. Same toxins were seen after the death of its hive mind, as if the flesh had desperately thirsted for life and strength. These creatures we saw being manufactured back in E3M1, and their attempts at recreating Healer. The mention of emotion also probably refers to how Growth was successful in forming a sentient and conscious beings with the Rustborn Messiahs. In these catacombs, there's also corpses of Malicants strewn about, Malnecris blooming by the dozen. Besides these, the church really isn't consumed by Growth at all. Maybe the bell is effective in keeping it at bay. That being said, this place did belong to the cult, and we find some notes. The throne once healed us. We brought it our sick and the dead, and it would give them life through rebirth. Two things into one, but as its strength waned, death, its ichor, swallowed everyone. This passage talks of how the throne became damaged with misuse over the centuries, and the Growth became what it is today. This is information we already knew back from episode 2. Ascending higher up, we reach this gathering room. The book on the lectern reads, "I write this at the risk of my own life. The throne was a prison for the Growth, primordial life. It was a slave of the demons from the stars. Throne spoke to me, warning me that the prison of the Growth had begun to crumble, blood and flesh of endless worlds within it screaming to get out, and the fools worshipped its firstborn." Again, this information is not new to us, but what is new to us is there was at least one cultist who wasn't blinded by faith and saw things for what they were. I was wondering why the game repeats so many things between the bestiary and the in-game lore bits and loading screen preludes. Much like how the bestiary unlocks only after beating the game, I suspect it might have been made later than the episodes themselves, too. I don't know if this is true or not, but it makes a lot more sense as to why the story is being told the way it is, if we assume the campaign was meant to be self-sufficient. The room at the top houses the Rift Storm we heard of before, and the Sentinel keeping it open. There's a white scar in the barrier, much like the one that let us into the throne back in E2M5. And much like that one, cutting it destabilizes the rift, breaking everything apart and sucking us into the familiar wormhole effect, and the level ends. So, this one is a doozy, but let's try to briefly analyze what is happening, as I believe later levels will shed further light. The level is called Oblivion Threshold, meaning it exists on the edge of some grand chasm. The church belonged to the cult, but now it is a home for a rift that leads to another place. That place is now where Growth is gathering all of its power and matter, and I don't think it is a coincidence that we have to travel through a wormhole to reach it. It's not just a portal in space and time. I believe the upcoming location is walling itself off from the rest of the universe. The final non-boss level of this episode is the titular Deathstorm Havoc, and Havoc there will be. The storm I released from the grafting throne is causing anomalies in the atmosphere. The city is rapidly crumbling around me, to make way for more of its twisted constructs. Whatever requires this much power must be the growth's final ace in stopping me. More of my humanity is slowly returning to me. I've begun to feel the weight of my body, and my breathing is becoming shallower. There is no telling how far I can keep going anymore. This might just be the most consistently deep red level in the game. Even though my recording software is set to the highest quality settings, there still creeps in some noticeable compression. Most of it takes place in these abstract vestiges of the city ruins, or the Rustborn constructs, everything hanging above some grand chasm. Even more so, there are several points where flashes of orange energy temporarily change the skybox to a vision of the throne's other world. In general, this area appears to be where the growth's powers are at their strongest. In the distance is probably the biggest skeleton in the game, along with other towering constructs, sparkling with yellow or orange energy. Indeed, as the level transition implies, Malnekris is pooling all of its resources together and funneling them towards some final project. Besides what I've brought up, this level is primarily a test of combat mettle and endurance. Twice we must ascend these spires, while fending off immeasurable hordes of filth, and we even get to stack 2 Carnage amplifiers at once. Much like in Dusk, the effect of these power-ups compounds, while the game goes to great lengths to tell us Healer has lost strength and is now barely holding on. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling more powerful than ever. We find ourselves facing a mountain of rot and decay, and a choice of 2 teleporters. This is my final obstacle. I should use everything I have, save none of my ammo, especially the warheads. This isn't actually the final obstacle, but each of the teleporters takes us to a different, yet both the most challenging and intense arenas of the game. This is where Incision really became one of my all-time greats. This is exactly the kind of exasperating and unrelenting challenge I play throwback shooters for. When we're done with the first one, we get the message. The bloodshed stirs the great vault of flesh. A portal has opened. This portal takes us back to the 2 gates, and completing the other tells us the mountain of death and rot stirs from the bloodshed. A portal has opened above. Now, realistically, these messages are just in-character context clues on what we should be doing. However, my job here is to be obnoxiously anal. So from a lore perspective, these imply the point of spilling all this blood in the arenas was to feed this somewhat sentient being of death and disease. Hey guys, just wanted to interject something quickly here. As I was no-clipping around, grabbing footage for the video, I realized that these constructs I mentioned earlier are actually the arenas that the 2 big arenas that you fight in near the end of the level. I also noticed how, if you look at the mountain of rot, there's these pulses of energy going up it. I mean, it doesn't tell us anything new. I just thought I felt like it solidifies this connection that this bloodshed that we're spilling in these arenas is actually, powering the creature and what's inside. Now a 3rd gate is available in the center, which lets us towards the awful construct. With another glimpse of the other world, we get to enter inside. A pit full of monsters and explosive barrels seems to be the final blood sacrifice we must perform before dropping down into the original rust organs. Now seeming completely defunct and devoid of any activity, the lights are off and walls of flesh and viscera prohibit us from accessing the rest of the level. The only way to go is back towards the original entrance. Growth has completely changed its objective since that fateful day. This used to be an instrument used to conquer the planet, but now Growth is unable to stop even one man. The final level of Incision is the alchemical miracle. I was never their prisoner. They were studying me all this time. I was being tested, pushed to my limit so the Growth could improve upon my blueprint. thousands of its creations sacrificed so they could see what I was capable of and where they could do better, but they didn't expect me to survive this far. The destruction of the throne brought down the Malikant's purified medicine and combined it with putrefied flesh of the growth. With the heart I was gifted, the source of my strength, the end product of this unification can be nothing less than the growth's magnum opus. In case you don't know, magnum opus, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is the most important piece of work done by a writer or artist. We have to walk through the ending portion of the level, eerily empty of activity, but filled with weapons and ammo. On my first playthrough, I felt like this moment of returning back to a decrepit version of an old level wasn't really earned, and it kind of felt like the game was just playing the cheap trope that it's seen in Dusk. But now, having paid more attention to the environmental storytelling, it makes a bit more sense, and feels slightly more foreshadowed. A lot of the locations and sites we see in this episode seem deliberately reminiscent of past moments, and realistically, we have seen this mountain of rot before, just not from the perspective of Healer. This thing is the flesh cocoon that we started the game in, and I should have seen this coming. But, like I said, I am an especially dense motherfucker. When coming up on the bridge that led us out of here, it cuts off, and this is the sight we're greeted with. The house in the background that we started the game in, a gaping pit in the ground, and one final trick up Growth's sleeve. Leaping down, the mound of flesh starts lethargically moving, but most of the threat comes from two giant ethereal eyes, situated on the same spires we saw all the way back then. Once the eyes are gone, the central creature explodes into a vortex of energy, and another giant eye reforms. The health bar for the alchemical miracle appears, and its true form is revealed. This creature is clearly reminiscent of Healer. The mask on its face, the blade on its arm, the things growing out of its back to me feel deliberately similar to depictions of the throne. The yellow mesh on parts of its body signifies the creature is not fully developed yet, and the yellow glow in its chest probably represents all the energy poured into it. The name Alchemical Miracle appeared all the way back in the very first level, on the whiteboard. This really is the final stage of Growth's attempts at creating a perfect killing machine, and is an improvement on Healer's design. The bestiary description reads: "It had become clear that the Healer was not simply a prisoner of the Growth. In truth, the prison of flesh he spent 6 months preparing in was nothing but a starting point for a journey Growth had built for him. He was perfect, one of a kind, radiating a kind of power which Growth could not reach, so it settled with observing him, waiting for him to show its potential. It could not fight its one imprinted mission, which was to protect the grafting throne, but a loophole did exist. Healer was allowed to kill all of its creations, lay waste to its structures, and tear his way to the grafting throne. Every gunshot, slice, dodge, jump, and reload of a weapon was a step furthering the Growth's magnum opus, which was missing one last component, the grafting throne's power. Indeed, eventually the grafting throne was shattered, and the sky rained with purified growth, invigorating its project even further than expected. A miracle from the sky gave birth to the one fated god which the cult had spoken of, one who would harness worlds between worlds, energy to shape life anew, and power to shattered worlds. After all, Growth only wished for one thing, the most primal objective, shared by all of its flesh, to grow and get stronger. The Growth was always killed off and harvested before it could reach the stage by the Malikant. But now, with them gone, this being is not only a potent champion, but also a combination of all the powers playing part in this story, making it an effective god. Shooting the eye in the sky, or should I say, hole in the sky, doesn't deal damage to the health bar, but it will eventually break and harm the boss substantially. The entire fight is a visual clusterfuck of explosions and beams of energy. They can even pluck fighter jets from the sky and throw them at us. Killing the boss results in getting enveloped in a white light before the cutscene plays. The core of Healer has been modified or entirely recreated to be of a size suitable for the alchemical miracle. They push the spear saw inside, and the explosion throws them onto the ground. The sky turns from a red vortex to black, and the blood rain turns into water, washing everything away, as the white light flickers from our eyes. The block from the very start is still here, and Healer hobbles over, a dying sycophant, against the wall has their head obliterated, as the protagonist drops onto a chair, and Kitty climbs onto his lap. Exhausted beyond belief, he passes out, and we see Healer's true eye for the first time since the opening cutscene. The credits play, but this is not the end. There is one more cutscene to go through. Healer again, still in his bloodied hazmat suit, puts on Inni on the gramophone, and we look through some newspapers. One headline reads, "City devastated in mass bombing. Countless dead for no clear reason. Furious relatives now demand answers. Lone survivor seen leaving the site of catastrophe. Law enforcement searching, hoping to find some answers." With a picture of some people with no discernible details. Terrorist group celebrates claiming glory for the alleged bioweapon attack. The Red Rock Devil, real or hoax? As the dust settles, rumors of odd sightings are inbound. Disgusting use of a recent tragedy to make up hoaxes and conspiracy theories. The camera shows us the inside of a house, with the same chair and lamp we know from earlier, and a doghouse with Kitty written on it. Healer walks up to some potted plants, one of them clearly being a remnant of growth. The glow in his eye is back, and he still looks exactly the same as before. Looking out the window, he sees some military-looking trucks driving by, and the camera shows us the sign taped onto the front door of this house. Inspection notice condemned. This establishment has been deemed unsafe and its occupancy has been prohibited by the city building inspector. It then pans away to Red Rock Trailer Park and cuts off to the end. That's a lot to go over, but we now have every piece of information. As for the story of Incision, I will soon go back and dissect these final levels, but I want to make a short interjection. These details and events are some of the most cryptic, and to me they toe the line of falling into all-out abstraction. There is just very little to go off of to create a coherent storyline, and therefore a lot of what I will be saying will be essentially speculation. I want to reiterate what I said in the previous video. I do not have some secret arcane knowledge about this game that is inaccessible to mere mortals. The goal of these videos is to show you everything relevant or interesting about the story of this game, and then present my overanalyzed interpretation of it all. Ideally, I would want them to be sparks for further discussion and analysis, because at the end of the day, I'm just an idiot who got their hands on an editing software. With that in mind, I've been thinking a lot about how I will summarize these last 3 levels. Oblivion Threshold especially has been sitting in my head for months. So let's go over what I think is happening. When the throne was destroyed, its power rained down along with all the growth and medicine from the wreckage from the Malekith ship. This energy was forming the other world within, but it didn't just go away. It was now pooling along with the growth, which in turn was preparing its final project. I believe all this concentration of resources warped the space around it so hard that the location of the flesh cocoon is starting to become a second otherworld in of itself, as hinted by the glimpses we get into the former pocket dimension inside the throne. All of it is meant to be concentrated inside of the alchemical miracle. The true throne used to be a sort of machine and interface between a mortal god and Malnekris, but now this final form of growth's champion will take its place. This is the true god that the cult believed to arrive one day. They were onto something after all. It's just that up until now, growth was never allowed to reach this stage of development. This is why it makes sense the knowledge or means to access this new otherworld was found in the cultic ruins by the Malekith, and it's where the portal is being kept open. It's also why the same mechanism transports us as it did when we entered the throne. It also makes sense why the flesh cocoon is at the center of it all, as it's a place of metamorphosis and gestation. At the start we thought it would have been that of the player, but now it's clear it was intended for something else. The spires projecting the eyes in the boss fight were always there. The space demons have lost their purpose after the destruction of the matriarch and the throne, and now wish to travel to the new nexus of activity. I realized that despite expressing their desires to go through the rift, this Sentinel is the final Malicant we see in the game, outside of this Easter egg in the final level. Therefore, I believe they were all taken, or came here specifically to give themselves to the growth. They still fight us, if only to protect their new purpose, as we're working to destroy it. The Alchemical Miracle is an imitation of Healer, but perfected and using his stolen power. When it dies, the protagonist destroys his former core and the concentration of all the forces at play here. The transition to an environment without growth is pretty jarring, and I struggle to exactly make sense of the effects. Clearly, this doesn't kill off all growth, as Kitty is still with us, and so is Healer. I think the biomatter of growth is still there, but now it's just meat, without any guidance, purpose or sinister edge, and probably quite helpless. Episode 3 is the point where the military finally decided to do something about the problem since the initial outbreak, and is conducting bombing runs with jets. While this demolishes some of growth's constructs, it's not going to be effective against the real threat, as the final boss can literally pluck them out of the sky. In this final cutscene, the military trucks driving past could represent them going to safely dispose of the remaining growth, or maybe it's a cliffhanger. The newspapers we get glimpses of show us that the general public has no idea what really happened in Red Rock, and that makes sense if growth was consuming everything and everyone. The only ones who really would have known the truth would have been Healer and maybe the military, along with maybe some other potential survivors. And why would the military want to disclose any of it? Realistically, they probably don't know the cause of the tragedy, and it might well have been the result of some awful bioweapon used by terrorists. Healer is still alive, and living in seeming peace. I'm not sure why he hasn't changed his clothes, or at least washed the blood off of him. I wonder if the hazmat suit is now part of his body. The glow in his eyes is back too, which seems strange. As the remnants of his strength waned, the flickering light finally disappeared, representing a full return to humanity in spirit, even if his vessel was still transformed. Remember, the white glow represents the throne's power given to him. Characters in media are sometimes represented with their characteristic features, even if it doesn't make sense for them to have these features right now, just for the purpose of recognizability by the audience. In the intro to Elden Ring, for example, the Dung Eater is shown getting hung in his armor, even though it makes no sense for them to be hanging him with the noose around it. Therefore, it makes sense the only reason he's drawn this way is for the audience to recognize him later. Maybe something similar is happening here. I'll be honest, this single sign on the front door is giving me nightmares, because it complicates what seemed like a simple ending. Healer is now safe, leading a simple life as an owner of a trailer park, letting someone better equipped finish the job of eliminating growth. But then, why is his house condemned? I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since starting this series, and I think the best hypothesis I've got is what came to me today as I'm writing this script. I promise this will be my final crackpot theory, so bear with me. I think Healer is hiding from the military. He wasn't evacuated, he wasn't discovered by anyone, he came to this house in the trailer park, which was evacuated as the cataclysm was unfolding, and made it his shelter to live under the radar for as long as he could. Given his unusual appearance, there is a decent chance the military would not treat him as a victim and civilian, but as just another growth monster, albeit particularly intelligent. Kitty would probably also have been killed or dissected for scientific purposes. They definitely wouldn't be letting him keep this growth plant, so at the very least, it's pretty clear his existence in this location is not sanctioned. Oh my god, I just realized something as I'm recording this this audio. You know how the Sentinel in the first at the end of the first episode he rings the bell and it causes Healer to drop down on his knees. This isn't relevant to what I was talking about, by the way. But then I'm thinking, okay, well, in episode 2, the Sentinels we fight, they don't really have this effect. Like, they do kind of slow us down when we get hit by the magic, but that's basically it. And then in episode 3, there is this church, and simply being in this church with the Sentinel that's bellowing this bell, it slows you down, it forces you to disable your flashlight. What if this is the same Sentinel? What if this one Sentinel is special for whatever reason? And it's the same one, because it's the only 2 times that the bell has this effect on us. That wasn't supposed to be my final crackpot theory. This is another one. This one might be the most crackpot of all crackpot theories. Yeah, I might cut that. I don't know if that's going in the video. I think the final mystery to solve is, why is Healer called Healer? Unfortunately, there's essentially no clues given on this. You see, we don't really heal anything or anyone. Instead, we, well, nuke shit to oblivion. The closest we come to healing something is bringing down the medicine onto the growth in the city. Maybe this word is more metaphorical, in that we heal the world of growth, but that's not very satisfying. Let's consider for a moment the context of the word. In the game, Healer is only ever used by the pilot, and no other source. If we ignore things like the bestiary descriptions, this title is just something Pilot decided to call the protagonist, for whatever reason. The bestiary does call them Healer both as the name of the character and also refers to them as such in other descriptions. However, I feel like if this was indeed written after the episodes were created, this should be treated as a secondary source to the game itself. So we would have to consider, what exactly does the pilot think we should be healing? Did he think we would heal the grafting throne back to its original state? This is contradicted by his description, saying he wanted us to destroy it. At times, the pilot says "my healer," which he could interpret as either healer that was created by me or healer of me. This is before he got sliced in half by the matriarch, and maybe at this point in time, he wasn't intending on dying by our hands? So, what if he did think we would heal him of something? I feel like this is as close as I can get to answering this question, and I'm pretty happy to hand it over to you guys. This is the one thing that always felt to me like it was never going to have an answer, but maybe you know something I don't. Alright, I think that's about all the mysteries that needed explaining in the game, so we will shortly get to the recap. I promised that we'd get back to the cutting of faces, and I did write 2 massive paragraphs of this utterly unhinged theory about how growth is disassembling and reassembling Healer between areas it controls, but looking at it now, it seems incredibly dumb, and I don't want to be putting dumb ideas in your head. Honestly, that theory was just a result of me trying to understand why some levels end with a face and others not. It feels deliberate, doesn't it? In episode 1, there's only one level transition that doesn't end with a face, and it's the last one. In episode 2, the first one takes place in the Vivarium, and the second one is after transitory termination, on the Malekith ship. I still think there is some reason behind this, but it's probably quite mundane, simple, and not particularly important. So, what do you think? Maybe you have some explanation I haven't thought of. Anyway, my list of things to get back to has now been completely emptied, which feels extremely satisfying. Therefore, let's finally get to the complete recap of the entire Incision timeline and story. The timeline starts untold centuries, millennia, or even longer than that ago. A race of beings we only know under the title of Ancient Ones were in possession of the grafting throne. Whether it predates them or not is unclear, and its origin is also unknown. The grafting throne was a tool of great power and influence. Within it resided an ocean of Malnekris, a soup of primordial life, which could be used in deliberate and calculated ways to manipulate life through rapid evolution or its decomposition back into basic materials. This growth, at its most extreme, was capable of consuming and repurposing biomatter while creating constructs of meat for further expansion. But that's not how it used to go. The grafting throne houses an otherworld, a pocket dimension, within itself as a result of its energy and power. In order to enter, rebranding must be undergone by a living creature. This process can be performed artificially through massive exposure to growth or by use of the throne itself. It causes the being to undergo a lot of physical transformations, including growing a special bone blade. This blade is a key to cut open a rift in space and allows the owner to enter the other world. Inside, the true throne awaits, and the controls within for it, allowing them to perform the previously listed actions. These creatures are referred to as mortal gods because they will all fall to time. Within the throne, they will be buried, and new ones will come to take their place. We meet the animated corpses of the Ancient Ones, and their number might be very high. However, each new creation of the throne is more powerful than the last. They created a race of beings called the Malicant, and the first of them was rebranded to be the new pilot, while the rest took the place of their creators, whether that be by conquest or thanks to wielding the power of the throne. Their signature feature are their 3 eyes. In this game, if something has 3 eyes, it's either Malicant or meant to look like them. The Malicant built a society of order and obedience under the matriarch. She rose to power by telling them death was a shortcoming, which could be cured, and hatching a plan to harvest immeasurable amounts of growth. She somehow shackled the pilot to be sent down with the throne onto planets harboring life, and then for Malnekris to consume all the biomatter to become one. It's difficult to say exactly how this process looked like back then, but we will get to see what it's like on Earth. Once the growth died, it would liquefy and be fit for harvest. It was an essential component to producing life-prolonging medicine for the Malicant as a whole, so they could be kept alive for another world to be killed off. At least, that's what the matriarch told them. She discovered rebranding could be performed artificially, using huge amounts of their medicine. Her real goal was to undergo this process, kill the pilot, and become the next mortal god. Most of the glorious substance was funneled directly to her and the cherished. Malicant modified to resemble her and enhance their combat skills. And so this race built harvest vessels to send into deep space to feed their cruel cycle. They became the masters of growth and used its near magical abilities of imitation to construct their very ships, and probably most of their structures in general, becoming entirely dependent on it and their leader. Her son was the first to be rebranded, to see if the facilities and technology would work. The process was successful. He transformed into an aquatic, fish-like creature, while keeping his appendages and growing the bone blade necessary to access the throne. This sparked great jealousy within the matriarch, and she cast him into the sewer underbelly of the ship, never to be seen again. One day, the Malicant discovered Earth and life on it. In the 1700s at the very latest, but probably earlier, they planted the throne in anticipation of the coming harvest. It was delivered to a group of people who believed the giant creature to be a chariot of the gods and a true divinity. They became a religious sect as they witnessed the throne perform miracles of curing the old and sick, or even resurrecting them at a cost. A terrible new form, a result of making 2 things into one, they saw as divine and purified instead. The most loyal and holy of members were laid in the closest proximity of the throne and became its stationary guardians. As time went on, a crack formed within the vessel, a result of age-old misuse, from which growth seeped. This was actually what allowed the pilot to start acting out his plan of ending the cycle of death and exploitation. This growth acted more like the all-consuming and assimilating force we witness in the game. It started creating a firstborn, combined of all the sacrifices brought forth by the now death cult. Once upon a time, people gathered to be cured, purified or resurrected, but now the only purpose of the cult was to feed sacrifices to this firstborn, willing or unwilling. The purpose of this creature was to grow, get stronger, and protect the throne so that the Malicant would not come back for it. The pilot needed another being to rebrand, which could destroy the throne and everything it stood for, and the space demons would not allow for that. The cult developed, with arrivals from all around the world, usually desperately following rumors of a divine cure to whatever ailment they held. They believed the firstborn to be a near god that would eventually consume all of Earth if it could grow big and strong enough. Over the centuries, they took many forms, but with the throne unexpectedly falling dormant, the sands of time eventually buried the holy site, chariot, and firstborn. The game starts with Episode 1, Death Cult Vestiges. In modern times, archaeologists uncover the old cult grounds, one of which being the player character. Their expedition led them all the way down to the throne, and the new presence woke up the machine. It commands a sea of Malnecris to rise, trapping the player character before taking hold of them and stabbing their face with a tentacle. The protagonist is referred to as Healer in the bestiary and other sources. Note that the pilot is in control of the throne during all of this. It is he who chose Healer as the ideal specimen to be rebranded, and rebranded they become. They undergo a transformation, grow a new face from a metallic mesh with a mask and glowing white eyes. This glow is a direct result of the throne's powers interacting with his body. A bone blade sprouts from their forearm before falling off, though it remains an important object of mystery and obsession for Healer. In this moment of rebranding, a singular goal was given to him by the pilot: come back to kill me and the throne. However, this could not be done there and then, as to destroy the entire machine, Healer would have to be relocated to a safe place, as growth invaded and took over the city of Red Rock, underneath which it resided. Healer was imprisoned, or so he thought, within an apartment block suspended in a cocoon of flesh. Across 6 months, growth slowly infected and invaded the city. Slowly enough that a martial law could have been imposed, and for people to be in the dark as to what is happening around them. It used hideous creations of flesh and fake steel as its foot soldiers, almost all of which were under the control of a hive mind, the Firstborn. Healer used this time to study the ever-present threat and his own new body. He discovered growth is a substance capable of incredible imitation and adaptability. It's able to erect entire buildings and other constructs from one singular material, despite all looking and feeling different from each other. He's captured and killed several different types of monsters, each of them reusing templates the threat has absorbed from humans or other living creatures in the past. However, growth largely operates independently of the throne and has different interests. The pilot in control is a sentient being, but the filth is just amorphous and invasive life that only wants to learn, improve, consume, and grow stronger. Growth was actually observing Healer all this time, because he was the strongest thing it's seen. All the obstacles it throws our way in the game are experiments on how to build something even more deadly and potent. The cocoon is already intended to be a place for gestation for what will come after him, but Healer doesn't know that yet. One day, a strike team arrives at his doorstep, which beckons him to start the journey back whence it all came and fulfill his purpose. The opposition includes Rustborn. Growth created imitations of the soldiers that used to fight it, and sycophants, non-turned humans that went mad from the horrible events and started worshipping growth as their god and bringing it more victims. More horrors of flesh and steel will follow shortly. This first level, Hole in the Sky, takes place inside of this cocoon. To leave the fake prison, we must cut this disgusting pale fleshy tumor. These constructs hold the mind of a human, and essentially controls some Rustborn systems. The level transition takes us to the Rust Organs, which is a key part in Growth's conquest of Earth. This facility burns up and processes biomatter, and the toxic fumes it emits contain an airborne agent, which allows the filth to build constructs using material from the atmosphere. The Malicant actually have their equivalent version in their ship, which immolates the bodies of their own dead and augments their production capabilities of the medicine. All of it for their mother god, of course. They believe they will one day harness the power of the throne for themselves and be able to resurrect all their fallen comrades, but that's a lie. Their comrades are processed filth. Inside of the main furnace, we fight a boss called Feral Armament, the description of which seems to suggest it's got a mind of its own, independent of the hive mind. In Blood Totems, we leave the Rust Organs and enter the infested city. Most of it has already been taken over by the Factory of Horrors, but some old buildings remain. A spire of flesh and bone has been erected by Growth, potentially for purposes of psychological warfare. That being said, the fleshy menace does sometimes just imitate things for the sake of imitation. Inside a hollowed-out cave, drenched in malnecris, Healer finds and adopts a creature he calls Kitty. As a pet and weapon, it's a small, fish-like organism with a will of its own. It has been resting on a bigger, dead specimen. The description of the Deathroot child, the matriarch's offspring, draws attention to the similarity between these two beings, and this is probably a template absorbed by Growth in the past, on another world. To make our way down, we must demolish a building and find a narrow hole. The filth pit and subsequent levels take place underground, and this one's in a large space, hollowed out by and lined with the ever-present malnecris. I believe this facility to be a spawning grounds, which also acts as a blockade for outsiders trying to fight their way in, such as us. Nervend is the next map, and it takes place just before the entrance to the old cult grounds. Part of it is a burial site for people who weren't let in, now being consumed, and part is another industrial-looking facility of Growth, along with sewers of blood. There is a neural network here that we need to disrupt before a huge lift takes us further down. The titular death cult vestiges are up next, and this level has several layers, so to speak. Some of it feels like an unholy cathedral and is quite ornate. Part of it takes place in decrepit catacombs, and after fighting another feral armament, we drop down the Well of Sacrifices to another, even older and very primitive burial site. The chief threat in this lair will be basic sculptures of the Malicant, animated by Growth. A giant gate is the final obstacle before the boss fight, capping off this episode. The throne's firstborn and its guardians protect the otherworldly being, but Healer was designed to cut through all opposition. Having slain the monster, he prepares to destroy the throne as well, but an unexpected problem appears. A squad of Malicant have arrived, and the Bellow of the Bell incapacitates the protagonist, while the aliens transport a chunk of the city, along with the throne, up to their harvest vessel, and that's where episode 1 ends. Episode 2, Death Filth Medicine, starts underground in the crumbling Harvest Vivarium. This is the part of Red Rock that's been latched onto by the Malicant for harvest of the decaying Growth. The death of the firstborn sent a shockwave across the ecosystem and is what liquefies the substance, along with emitting toxins that thirst for Healer's blood, looking to nourish a nuked central sentience. In this level, we hear a recording of a radio broadcast, which is our only glimpse into the events that happened during the 6 months of Healer's entrapment, the slow descent into chaos and how the humans could not possibly comprehend or prepare for what was happening. Parasitic Relations is the next level, a heavily corrupted and infested shopping center overflowing with seeping filth. This is where the intake for one of the pressure pipes that collects the produce is located, and we hitch a ride up to the vessel itself. The level called Death Filth Medicine starts with us getting dropped into a cell and coming face to face with the Malicant. The attempt to drown us in Growth, but some quick thinking results in us dropping down the waste tube before receiving a telepathic message from the pilot. He will be subtly guiding us through the levels taking place on the ship in order to destroy the throne and the matriarch. That being said, the goal of this level is the sabotage of the medicine production facility. The ship itself is made of growth, and we see it breaking out from underneath the control of the aliens, and even literally breaking through their bodies, while also spawning its hideous changelings. This is due to something called a dead old mind, and I'm not confident on where to place this in the timeline. It could have been the death of the firstborn, but instead I believe this happened a while ago, and we never find out what this old mind is. In the next level, we meet and fight the Death Road child in the depths of the growth transport tracts. They aren't killed, but merely flee and let us pass through on ahead. Transitory Termination is the next level, and it takes place in the Malikant's own Rust Organ style facility. At the end, we find the Matriarch's rebranding pod, and she grows a blade as we watch, lashing out in fury. The systems detect damage and drag her away. She's now ready and on her way to enter the throne, so we must stop her. The Ruptured Idol takes us through more utilitarian and brutalist environments, until it doesn't. Here we get a glimpse into what the life of the Malikant workers' lives looks like, with communal spaces for eating and relaxation. We also see the Death Road child might have come back to seek the throne for itself, or maybe he also wanted to stop the matriarch, but now lies decapitated in her throne room. We view her opening a rift in space before entering the realm of the Grafted Throne. Grafted Throne? Seriously? It's Grafting Throne, you fucking moron. Before entering the realm of the Grafting Throne, with us following closely behind. Despite this, we still have to make it through an entire unnamed level of the Other World, a shattered ashen scape of various temples, burial sites, and other structures, all hanging above a red surface of primordial life. We recognize the origin of familiar templates presently in the hellscape on Earth, such as the spires or the tombs hanging from the side of the walls. Taking one more portal, we finally meet with a dying pilot, cut in half by the matriarch. He explains it was his idea and goal to rebrand the protagonist in order for them to return and destroy the throne, the pilot and the matriarch. And along with them, this whole cursed cycle. He asks for death, and we can choose to kill him or not, but it doesn't matter because he's going to be destroyed along with the throne soon anyway. The matriarch is already taking control over the controls. Did I fucking what is this bullshit? Taking control over the controls, my fucking god, I'm such a fucking... The matriarch is already taking control over the machine, but not for long. In a fierce battle, Healer emerges victorious and destroys it all. All the screaming, writhing Malnekris spills out of the broken throne, before destroying the harvest vessel and bringing down the medicine, otherworldly powers and flesh down onto Red Rock. The final episode, Deathstorm Havoc, has a lot of changes up its sleeve. A lot of the antagonists, save for growth itself, are gone, but their powers are not. It's all pooling and blending together into a disgusting sludge of abominable energy. Healer has been captured by the monsters, and they ripped out a red organ out of his body, the seat of his own strength, given by the throne. They immediately get to analyzing all of the data they've received and throw him into an incinerator. Remember, the protagonist is not some mortal enemy of the all-devouring flesh, it is essentially a testing tool. Even back in E1M2, we've seen how it's analyzing Healer's actions. The goal of the test? To create a right and proper god and champion, using our form, power and the energy of the throne. Now they've got everything, they just need time, and the tool has just outlived its usefulness. Breaking out of the machine, as we always do, the cherished flesh takes place in another Rust Organs type of facility. In one of the sections, we already find early attempts at recreating Healer's form. The functional specimens will come later. As if by imitation, part of the construct is very reminiscent of the apartment building from the start of the game. Once we've broken out, we see what's been trembling and shaking the earth. Jets are flying around, dropping bombs on the contaminated city after 6 months. We see the city is no better off. The Malnecris is aggressively transforming the very air around it, and even my own footage. The first boss of this episode is a trio of Rustborn messiahs, independent imitations of healer, sentient too, and the final one chooses to self-terminate, given their psyches must have been extremely fractured. Past them is Oblivion Threshold, a staging point for the Malicans to travel through a rift in space. They aren't all dead. Part of their ship has crash-landed here, and they are dejected, forsaken. Centuries of their persistence and work, all for nothing. Growth is winning, and they might as well see where this all leads towards, giving their bodies to whatever process is happening. A single sentinel keeps open a portal to the heart of Growth's activity, a place of such immeasurable energy where the throne's power is forming a new otherworld from a chunk of red rock. The titular Deathstorm Havoc is the final trial where bloodshed of such intense magnitude must take place that a mountain of rot opens a way for us inside. As it turns out, this disgusting construct is the cocoon we started the game in, and the now obsolete and defunct rust organs let us through to the final boss. The real object gestating inside, the alchemical miracle, is the result of everything Growth has learned from observing Healer and the wielder of his throne-born strength, as well as the energy of the throne itself. This is what the cult was expecting to arrive, a unitary being to consolidate it all. Inside, a replica of the red organ sits. When destroyed, now it's Growth that loses its purpose and resources, starting the slow process of the city turning back to normal. Growth withers and is washed away, and Healer's humanity finally takes its place instead. The epilogue shows the protagonist finding shelter in an empty trailer park, hiding from authorities. And that's it. Incision's lore explained and analyzed to a petty degree. I am so tired right now. I don't even know how to finish off this video. I think one thing I haven't emphasized enough is that some of these plot points are basically just speculation on my part. Oblivion Threshold, for example, has so many strange implications that are very difficult to make heads or tails of on a first playthrough. My theory that Growth and the throne's powers have concentrated to such a critical density that they're forming a new otherworld, and the level is a gateway to that, is based on a few context clues, and that's it. But you see what I'm working with. These context clues are all I've got. That's just how episode 3 is. Similarly, I feel like I'm missing something with the ending cutscene, because this one fucking sign in the end is all it takes to complicate a seemingly simple happy ending. Healer survived and is living a peaceful life as the owner of a trailer park, right? Well, why is his house condemned then? It has to mean something else is going on here. But again, I'm hoping these videos to be a jumping off point for you guys. I'm showing everything there is to show in this game, trying to interpret it one way or another, and then have discussions with you on what the consensus should be. I also feel like the videos don't really do justice as to how convoluted this whole story really is. Remember that on your first playthrough, you will not have the bestiary unlocked, possibly the single clearest and most objective source of information in the game. Almost all of this is still communicated within lore bits and loading screen messages, but those are a lot more cryptic and harder to interpret. And then you get this massive load of info dumped on top of you at once, as soon as you've beaten the game. Everything, no matter the source, is also explained in a non-linear order. As such, it took me more than 2 playthroughs and reading through the entire bestiary several more times before I felt confident enough to start making these videos, and I was still expecting having to figure a lot of things out as I was going along. Following the story might seem kind of trivial if you haven't played the game, but my experience has been anything but. For example, on my first playthrough, I had no idea that the alternate dimension we enter in E2M6 is an otherworld inside of the throne. Remember, by then, the only hint of this pocket dimension you're going to have is this lore bit from the pilot, talking of being a dweller of the throne. I thought, if anything, this was the homeworld of the Malicant, and without this knowledge, things kind of start falling apart. Without the other world, rebranding, key wielding, piloting, all stop making sense. No longer is it understandable what the matriarch even wants, and no longer do we know why the throne fucking dies at the end of the episode. Some of it was me just being a dense motherfucker. Until this playthrough, I did not realize that the corpse inside of the matriarch's throne room was the Deathroot child. It reminded me a lot more of the pilot for some reason, until I took a really close look at it this time. So I made these videos as straightforward as I could, so that other dense motherfuckers could also follow. I think there's a few reasons why this game made a big impression on me with regards to the lore. One of them is that, despite reusing a lot of ideas, there's still a lot of fresh concepts to this lore. Normally in cosmic horror, the source of the evil would come from an other world, but in this game it is the throne that has an other world inside of itself instead. I also like how the corporeal threat in the form of the growth is somewhat detached from its source, and similarly, the faction controlling the throne is just another third party. Despite it all coming right back to growth, there's so many different independent agents, acting with their own interests in mind, which often conflict with each other. The protagonist, the matriarch, the pilot, growth and its spawn, the Deathroot child, and, in the past, the cult and the ancient ones. I was very impressed at how this game handled non-linear and fragmented storytelling too. Many game devs these days have seen the success of this Dark Souls style storytelling and thought to themselves, wait, I can just write a bunch of word salad, cut it up into pieces, attach it to random objects and NPCs, and that's considered deep storytelling even if none of it makes any sense? Despite loving Dark Souls and its story, I find most of these executions fall completely flat on their faces, precisely because it's often just word salad that isn't actually explaining anything that happens in the game, nor giving any wider context, and I think even FromSoft themselves fell into this trap with their newest releases. These statements are meaningless because they're never corroborated or challenged by anything the player sees for themselves. When I was playing through Incision for the first time, I was very confused as to what was happening and why, but due to the game's limited scope and the repeating concepts, names and themes, it felt like there really was something to piece together here. As I was replaying the game and rereading the bestiary, the pieces did start falling together. The overall volume of story content is nowhere near anything like Dark Souls, but that's what allowed one guy such as myself to cover basically everything in just 3 videos, and I'm still really proud of what I've put together here. I think that's about everything I've had to say for now, but before I go, I wanted to share one last cool detail in this game. While editing, I accidentally discovered that many of the sounds you hear during level transition screens are actually severely slowed down fragments from a music track playing in the upcoming level. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, just wanted to quickly mention another detail I found. If you're using the level select feature to play individual levels, you're going to be starting with no weapons. You're just gonna have the starting revolver and spear saw. And this is like a pistol start in Doom, right? Like the weapons are found in the level. Now this actually includes Kitty. The only times that you actually pick up Kitty is E1M3, E2M1 and the E3M1. These are the only levels where Kitty is a pickup in the level. But if you use the level select feature, it has to give you Kitty, so Kitty is placed somewhere in the level as well. I found that when you pick her up in these levels, it gives you different messages. Like the first time you pick her up, it's like, I shall call her Kitty, I think. But if you pick her up in the other levels, the messages are different, and as far as I can tell, they are specific to these levels. I don't think they're entirely unique. It seems like they repeat a bit, like some of these messages are like, let's get you something to eat, Kitty, or it's dangerous in here, Kitty, you know? But there is a special message that I accidentally found when I was, I loaded into the final level to get some more footage, and when you pick up Kitty, the message is, let's go home, Kitty, which is just so insanely sad to think about. I don't know about you, that just makes me sad. Yeah, it's just a small little detail I wanted to share. Guys, I hope you liked the video. If you do, I would really appreciate if you hit like and subscribe. I want to get monetized, which would help me spend more time and effort making these videos. So if you want to see that, you know what to do. Thank you, bye bye.